Audiobook by Fate's Reader. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel for more epic series. Drop your recommended novel below. We love to know what you want to hear next. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 381. Wedding Night. The dragon Qin carried everyone to the village in front, and Blind immediately took care of the purchases. He bought phoenix coronets and bridal gowns, some other outfits, and a big red silk ball for Qin Mu. He invited a few old women to help the four to change. Emperor Yanfeng lost his daughter, so he might find his way here. Who knows what will happen if we drag this out, so it's best they consummate immediately. Blind took out some great abundance coins from the little fox's bag to buy a huge house with a courtyard. He also hired some maids and took care of all other things, preparing to have them marry that day. Qin Mu was tied up firmly, but his cultivation was still there. He secretly blew the golden flute to make the flood dragons launch a sneak attack on Blind and tie him up. However, just as the golden flute sounded, before it could make a connection with the flood dragons, Blind sensed something wrong. He tapped the heart of Qin Mu's brows with his bamboo cane, and Qin Mu heard booming coming from his body. His 6 directions, 5 elements, and spirit embryo divine treasures were forcefully closed one after another. Blind was scared of him playing any tricks, so he sealed Ling Yuxiu and xianxia's divine treasures as well. Hu Linger saw him walking over and jumped in excitement. "Grandpa Blind, don't worry, Linger won't run." Blind immediately loosened the golden rope on her body. "I shall untie your ropes, so help me look after them. I shall go book a few banquet tables and invite a theatrical troupe." "All right," the little fox said without a moment's hesitation. "Traitor!" Ling Yuxiu and xianxia stared at her angrily. Hu Linger was immensely proud of herself. She jumped into a chair and swayed her braids. "Grandpa Blind sure is experienced," Qin Mu exclaimed in his heart, admiring him endlessly. The divine art he'd just used had casually sealed their cultivations, making them unable to execute their tricks even if they had any. "Fatty dragon, come over." Qin Mu's gaze flickered as he called the dragon Qin over. "Carry us and run." The dragon Qin shook his head. "Since I can't run faster than him, might as well not run." When he was done, he wagged his tail and went back to guard the door. Qin Mu was stunned. He felt the dragon Qin needed to lose weight severely. When nighttime came, Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu were held down by a few old women and forced to marry each other. Blind had invited nearly all the people in the small town to witness the wedding. He didn't accept any gifts, and the theatrical troupe also consisted of only ordinary people playing horns and suona. Everything was very basic. The wedding was naturally very bustling, though, and finally Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu were sent into the bridal room by the townsfolk. Hu Linger was unhappy to see that the bride wasn't her and began to drink a lot, spewing nonsense. Blind waved his hand and said, "Come again tomorrow, there'll be another wedding. The groom will be the same, but the bride will be changed." "This groom is truly a lucky man," everyone exclaimed and left. Hu Linger jumped onto the table, carrying a wine jar that was bigger than hers. She said in a drunken stupor, "Grandpa Blind, I want to be the bride tomorrow." All right. Blind nodded repeatedly. In the room, Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the commotion gradually fading into the distance. They felt slightly terrified and anxious. After a moment, Ling Yuxiu lifted a corner of her veil and took a sneaky glance at Qin Mu, who was wearing the big red silk ball at her side. He was clutching it nervously, and she suddenly burst into laughter. Qin Mu stared at her. "You can still laugh. If your father learns of this, he'll definitely take my head off." Wanting to lift up the veil, Ling Yuxiu rolled her eyes and giggled. "People say that it's unlucky for a girl to take off her own veil. A man must do it. There's even such a rule?" Qin Mu was astonished. He took the veil off of her and became stunned. The powdered and rosy-cheeked girl was indescribably captivating under the candlelight. Ling Yuxiu blushed bashfully and rolled her eyes at him. "What are you looking at? So beautiful." Qin Mu then stood up and went to push the door, but he couldn't open it. Grandpa Blind locked the door. "I'll go and check the windows." He opened the window and was about to jump out when a bamboo cane pointed at him. Blind's voice followed right after it. Sleep. Don't think of running. Qin Mu jumped in shock and said furiously, Grandpa Blind, why are you squatting at the corner? Rules, Blind said. Don't worry. I'm blind. I can't see anything. Sure you can't. Qin Mu closed the window and sat back down on the edge of the bed. Grandpa Blind is guarding over there, so I'm afraid we can't escape, he said, slightly depressed. The two of them sat at the side of the bed. Ling Yuxiu clutched the corner of her skirt, while Qin Mu held onto the red silk ball in front of his chest. After some time, Blind's coughing came from outside the window. There are nuptial cups on the table. Quickly drink them and sleep. Qin Mu picked up the wine jar and smashed it. Blind was furious and walked away with the cane. After a moment, they could hear him begin to beat a rooster. What's the use of having a small rooster that doesn't crow? If you don't crow, I will break your leg. Is Grandpa Blind scolding the rooster or me? Qin Mu was puzzled. After a moment, the window opened and a bamboo cane with a broken rooster leg appeared at the window. Qin Mu closed the window and went back to sit down on the edge of the bed. He muttered, We haven't met for quite a while. Ling Yuxiu burst out laughing. You are still bad with words. I'm slightly sleepy, so I shall go to rest first. Okay. Qin Mu saw her wormed under the blanket, until a small head popped out from under the big red blanket. Ling Yuxiu blinked at him. I'm sleeping. Okay. Ling Yuxiu gave a humph and turned to the other side. Qin Mu also laid down and covered himself with the blanket. The two of them shared a pillow and looked each other in the face. Qin Mu didn't dare to breathe, and Ling Yuxiu burst out laughing, her breath fanning his face. It instantly reddened, and the girl quickly gave him a peck on the lips. Smells pretty nice. Qin Mu blinked and said, Kiss again. Ling Yuxiu gave him another kiss, giggling. What's the use of kissing? Blind's impatient voice came from outside, slowly moving farther away. Little rooster can't crow, so it's better to stew it and eat. Emperor Yanfeng has caught up? Come to think of it, the emperor is now an in-law, so I can't be rude. I need to treat in-laws to a wedding feast, so I shall slaughter this rooster that doesn't crow to treat in-laws. Qin Mu heard him walking farther away and quickly left the bed. He went to the window and opened it sneakily. He stretched his head out to survey the surroundings, then waved to Ling Yuxiu, but she didn't come over. He turned his head back and saw that the girl seemed to be really asleep. Qin Mu went over carelessly and said quietly, Stop acting, quickly get up. Ling Yuxiu's face flushed, and she immediately left from under the blanket. She put on her shoes and crawled out through the window while Qin Mu received her on the other side, bringing her down. The two of them sneaked along the wall to see Yunxiang's room. When they came to her window, Qin Mu asked quietly, Is Sister Xiang asleep? Not yet. Her voice came from behind, and Qin Mu jumped in shock. He swiftly turned back and saw her sneakily following behind him. When did you come out? He asked in astonishment. See, Yunxiang seemed to be smiling yet not smiling. I've sneaked out a long time ago and wanted to listen from the wall. But in the end, I just heard a little female cat in heat calling out, yet there was no little male cat coming. Ling Yuxiu sneered and said, Some female cats don't even have the right to call for a little male cat. Cowherd boy, let's go and find the little fox. Linger has rebelled. Qin Mu shook his head and said, Let's go now, not making any sound. Where's Cult Master going? The dragon Qilin suddenly appeared behind them, shocking all three. Traitor! Qin Mu gritted his teeth. If you still want to eat, don't be noisy or else we will have a dragon banquet for New Year's. The dragon Qilin shuddered and followed behind them softly. Grandpa Blind is out. He said he's inviting Emperor Yanfeng for a wedding feast. We can sneak out now. Qin Mu looked behind the dragon Qilins and saw over a dozen flood dragons sneakily following after. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It might be unsafe leaving Linger here alone. Where's she? The dragon Qilin lowered his head, and a snow-white fox showed up on his forehead, sleeping peacefully. Go! Go quickly. If the emperor is here, My head is really going to roll. Qin Mu pulled onto the two girls and jumped on the back of the dragon Qilin with all his strength. Don't use the fire clouds or else Grandpa Blind will see. His eyesight is very good. We shall leave the town secretly, without alerting anyone. The dragon Qilin carried them out and headed south. After sprinting for 100 miles, Qin Mu was finally at ease and said, "You can now run with your full strength." The dragon Qilin increased his speed and ran the whole night. He traveled 3,000 or 4,000 miles and Qin Mu smiled. Grandpa Blind's eyes shouldn't be able to see this far. Fatty dragon, you can rest now. Surging River is right in front of us. So let's go by the riverside to reach the East Sea. We can then take a detour to the capital. Is Linger awake? Tie up the traitor. She's still drunk. They came to the surging river and were about to find a ship when they saw one sailing down from the center of the river. On its bow was an old blind man propping himself on a cane. Qin Mu's face turned ashen. "I've chased Emperor Yanfeng all the way to Great Thunderclap Monastery," Blind said calmly. "Mu'er, I've been waiting for you guys for 2 hours and only now did you reach here. I'm disappointed." Qin Mu was stunned, while the dragon Qilin immediately shouted, "Old Master Blind, I knew you were here so I rushed over with all my might." Everyone could only board the ship which immediately sailed them to Great Ruins. "When we are back at the village, it won't be too late to host the 2 remaining weddings," Blind said while beaming. "Yesterday night I invited Emperor Yanfeng to eat chicken, so he most likely agreed to the marriage." Qin Mu could already see himself being escorted to the market to be beheaded. Suddenly, the river water became turbulent, and the current grew in speed. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He hurriedly leaned over the side of the ship. He saw the water current suddenly turn back calm, but the water level grew higher and higher, until it gradually became as high as the trees and mountain on both sides of the river. Ling Yuxiu ran to the bow while Si Yunxiang went to the aft to look upstream and downstream. Both of them were stunned by the sight, for they could see surging river floating up from the river canal like a long jade ribbon. More and more of the river water floated into the sky like a water dragon. Everyone looked at it in a daze. The small ship sailed along the long river in the sky and looked numerous times smaller than before. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 382. Vein of the Fierce Dragon. Besides the group's ship, there were fishing and treasure ships transporting ores, black gold, black iron, and black copper. There were also merchant ships carrying goods and transport ships ferrying passengers. Surging River was flourishing, and the fish were plump and delicious. Thus there were many ships in the river as well as at the port. Yet the mountains on both sides vanished below the river and only ships were left on its surface. All of them stopped, and countless people stretched their heads out to look outside, not knowing what had happened. Divine arts practitioners flew up from their ship, looking at Surging River in a daze. Surging River floated in midair, its water stretching tens of thousands of miles in length. It continued to flow in the sky and gave off multicolored rays from the sun shining on it. Whoosh! A merchant ship that was transporting goods didn't manage to stop and sailed out of the river, falling from the sky. It fell toward the mountains helplessly and became smaller and smaller. After a moment, it crashed into a forest, but it took quite a while for the sound to reach the people on the river, which was a very dull thud. The owner of the merchant ship had hurriedly jumped out when the ship was falling and numerous divine arts practitioners had helped to save the crew, so there weren't too many casualties. There were Eternal Peace Empire's officials on a government cargo ship, and they immediately ordered divine arts practitioners to save people first, carry away the commoners on the other ships and send them to the land below. Some soldiers were also sent away to seek assistance from the city, invite people to save everyone on Surging River. "It's not my fault. Don't look at me, I didn't do it." Qin Mu and the rest looked at Blind, who was shaking his head with a grim expression. To have Surging River rise like that, his magic power is much stronger than mine. I have yet to see a person with such dense magic power. Take a look below. Qin Mu and the rest immediately looked downwards. Surging River had been raised and floated in the sky, its water separated from the land. The current, which was somewhat muddy, couldn't be seen. All the sand and the mud in the river had vanished. When Surging River had risen into the sky, only the water had been moved. The mud and sand weren't touched. Because of that, the river water had become incomparably clear, so they could see the land below through it. The group saw the marvelous sight of huge fish swimming about. Because Surging River originated in great ruins, there were numerous fish monsters and water monsters that usually remained in its depths, growing in all kinds of shape and sizes. Qin Mu had lived beside the river since he was young and had seen all kinds of fish and water monsters. However, he still noticed numerous fish and water monsters he had never seen before. They had to have been hidden deep at the bottom and rarely rose to the surface, so it was hard to see them. Yet the river was see-through right then, and the hair of everyone stood up on end. An incomparably huge and long satiny body brushed past the bottom of the group's ship. The creature moved along with the current and swam toward the west. Huge scales grazed the hull of the ship. It shook for a moment before becoming steady again. When the huge body swam past, it didn't raise any waves at all. When the scales grazed the hull of the ship, they didn't damage it. There was only some turbulence, as though rapid currents had hit the bottom of the ship. That creature was a sapphire blue flood dragon that was incomparably huge. On the ship, the flood dragons became excited. Some of them climbed onto Qin Mu's neck while others poked their heads out from under his armpits and looked around. "Maha! Maha!" cried the dozen more flood dragons. Whoosh! A huge head rose from the water and looked at them curiously before diving back in to swim away. Wherever it passed, the water monsters of Surging River avoided it. Some huge fish were so frightened that they escaped too quickly and left the water, flapping their fins as they fell from the sky. The clouds rained fish, which would give the commoners something to discuss for days. However, what would give them even more stuff to ponder about was that Surging River had risen into the sky. That flood dragon is so huge. Qin Mu's heart trembled violently. The sapphire blue flood dragon was much bigger than the complete forms of the little dragons around him. It was over 10 times larger. The sapphire blue flood dragon could be even stronger than dragon-rearing sovereign. Qin Mu didn't know, however, if it was a dragon raised by dragon-rearing sovereign or one that's been called over from somewhere. This is a water flood dragon that has cultivated to the god realm. His power to control water is very powerful, terrifyingly powerful. Blind had a grim expression as he looked to the west. He said in a hoarse voice, "I saw a man that had scales all over its body and looked very weird. He instructed this divine flood dragon king to raise Surging River." Qin Mu was slightly stunned. Could dragon-rearing sovereign of high heavens have come to take the dragon vein? I once saw his ability to move rivers. Blind gripped his bamboo cane tightly, his face slightly nervous. Such a dense magic power is truly powerful. This fellow should have borrowed the power of Divine Flood Dragon King to raise his magic power to its extreme. No, that's not right. It would still not be enough to raise Surging River up. He is borrowing the power of Surging River as well. Qin Mu executed 9 Heaven's Eyes awakening technique and looked upstream. He could only awaken until the level of Cinnabar Heaven's Eyes, so he couldn't see the middle section of Surging River where Dragon-rearing Sovereign should be. If he wanted to raise Surging River, the middle section was the best place to exert force. According to Qin Mu's understanding of Dragon-rearing Sovereign, he shouldn't have the power to raise Surging River. It had to have been borrowed from the Divine Flood Dragon King. He had most likely invited him to raise Surging River at the estuary while he placed flood dragons at the other places to stir up havoc, raising all of Surging River. Dragon-rearing Sovereign was knowledgeable about dragon veins and was skilled in directing their power. Other than inviting the Divine Flood Dragon King over, he had even called other flood dragons, but the most crucial thing was that he had probably mobilized the power of the dragon vein as well. With Surging River's own power, he had raised the giant body of water that stretched across tens of thousands of miles into the sky. Surging River was very ancient, and it was a dragon vein since founding Emperor era that was filled with many secrets. Due to that, it might soon mature and transform into a dragon. The power of Surging River's dragon vein was extremely great. If Dragon-rearing Sovereign was able to mobilize it, there was a good chance he could raise the river up. Does he plan on taking away Surging River's dragon vein? Qin Mu muttered. Blind shook his head. It's not that. He plans to change the path of the dragon vein so it would become a fierce dragon. With that, the fate of Eternal Peace Empire will be changed completely as well. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He immediately took out dragon rearing scripture and flipped to one of the pages. It introduced all kinds of dragon veins, and one paragraph mentioned how to change the path of the dragon vein to change fate and destiny. It detailed how to change the fate of an entire country. He's planning to guide great ruins to Eternal Peace Empire. Qin Mu cried out. From what was recorded inside dragon rearing scripture, the consequences of dragon rearing sovereign's action would be no small matter. Just by changing the path of surging river, he would force the dangers of great ruins to flow into eternal peace. If he succeeded, Eternal Peace Empire would be gradually transformed into a place that was like great ruins, one that was invaded by darkness at night. A very remarkable fellow. Blind's eye sockets were empty, but he seemed to be able to see where dragon-rearing sovereign was located. He gripped his bamboo cane tightly and tapped on the river surface while saying, "An ant hole may cause the collapse of a great dike, so he just needs to change the path of the dragon vein slightly to borrow its power to guide the darkness from great ruins into Eternal Peace Empire, spoiling its fate." His studies on dragons are extremely profound and his attainments are astounding. His bamboo cane tapped gently on the river surface, and the ship below their feet shot forward like an arrow that had left the bow. They sailed straight for the middle stream of surging river, their speed so fast that the ship started creaking, unable to handle the pressure. It was about to break apart at any moment. Crack! This ship broke apart and countless wooden shards flew in all directions. Qin Mu and the others all executed their magic power to run on the river surface. However, the water under their feet churned. Fierce dragons' roars could be heard as water dragons rose up, carrying their bodies forward at a rapid pace. Blind held onto his bamboo cane while sitting on a dragon's head. Qin Mu and the rest looked nervously at both sides, seeing 10,000 dragons roaring while flying forward. This surging river is the territory of Old Blind. Under their feet, surging river rushed forward, and Blind's clothes fluttered in the wind as he overflowed with murderous intent. "Have you asked this dragon king before moving it?" The water dragons surged toward the west. The youths didn't know how far they had traveled when Blind suddenly raised his bamboo cane and tapped with on the dragon's head heavily. The water in a few 100-mile radius trembled violently, and surging river looked like a long dragon whose waist had been severely injured, because of which it uncontrollably fell to the ground. At the riverbed below, dragon-rearing sovereign's feet moved like those of a dragon, slithering around as he raised his hands up high. Violent magic power flooded out and raised up faltering sections of surging river. At the same time, a huge stone beast that was dozens of yards tall at the bottom of the river got wrapped by his magic power and flung out to the foothills. Dragon chasing technique from dragon rearing scriptures. Dragon rearing sovereign had hurried up from downstream, and along the way he'd seen numerous stone creatures which were river suppression beasts. They had been forged by the officials of Eternal Peace Empire, and all kinds of runes were imprinted on them. They were used to suppress the dragon vein in case its tremors caused water hazards. There were quite a number of extraordinary people in Eternal Peace Empire who could recognize dragon veins, so they had ordered skilled blacksmiths to forge river suppression beasts to suppress the dragon vein. Usually, because of them, surging river's dragon vein would be obedient. But once they were pulled out one by one, the power of the dragon vein was completely activated. Other than river suppression beasts, there were also a lot of strange items that had been brought downstream, each one of them more bizarre than the other. Dragon-rearing sovereign tried to avoid them as much as possible so that he wouldn't meet unnecessary trouble. The closer he got to great ruins, the more and more of those strange items were in his way. Surging river in there actually also had stone statues suppressing it, so it was definitely impossible for dragon-rearing sovereign to lift it there. But his aim wasn't to take away surging river, so there was no need to trouble himself with that. He just needed to change the path of the dragon vein and its origin so it would become a fierce dragon. But at that moment, surging river that was in midair suddenly came crashing down. Shocked, dragon-rearing sovereign stood still, his hands frozen above his head. Suddenly, The river water above transformed into a huge pillar which came stabbing down. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 383. The Blind Spear God. The strike had the pressure from the power of surging river and the divine arts from Blind's own immense magic power, and dragon-rearing sovereign immediately felt an incomparably intense sense of danger before the strike had even landed. Why are there so many experts in a tiny place like Eternal Peace Empire? It was too late for dragon-rearing sovereign to change his move, so he could only grit his teeth to execute all his magic power to welcome Blind's strike. The pillar of water spun rapidly, its speed so fast that even the air began screeching as it was sliced. At the front of the pillar, the concentrated water transformed into a dragon's head to pounce on dragon-rearing sovereign. Using dragon-shaped spells to deal with me? Dragon-rearing sovereign let out a sigh of relief and his body trembled. Dragon-shaped vital chi flooded forward and transformed into a huge 1,000 dragons plate that coiled around his head. Dragon-rearing sovereign raised 1,000 dragons plate up high, and countless flood dragons bared fangs and brandished claws while dancing in the wind. Even though this person is an expert, he has still met his nemesis. I am a god that raises dragons, so the details of dragon-shaped divine arts will never be able to escape my eyes. This person is not to be feared. Just as he thought that, the dragon's head started to spin, and the water pillar coiled to transform into an incomparably huge dragon spear. The dragon's head leaned on the blade while the river water transformed into the sharpest tip. It's not a dragon-shaped divine art. Dragon-rearing sovereign's heart trembled violently. Blind's spear had already stabbed into 1,000 dragons plate and struck a point on the 1,000 dragons. The spear's power that burst forth was unexpectedly small, and its force wasn't powerful at all. However, 1,000 dragons plate still crumbled, and the bodies of the 1,000 flood dragons warped as they become disorganized. In the center of the huge 1,000 dragons plate was a huge hole. Dragon-rearing sovereign turned to take a look at the incomparably thick dragon spear at the center of his defense. The power of that spear didn't explode during the collision with 1,000 dragons plate, so it will definitely explode when it reaches my corporeal body. The man's move is brilliant, and his control of divine arts has already reached their extreme. He is able to see through the weakness of my divine arts. Dragon-rearing sovereign couldn't waste time. He no longer tried to lift surging river up, but with all his magic power flooding into his hands, he spread his palms to create layers of barriers. However, they were all pierced through by that spear as if there was no obstruction at all. Dragon-rearing sovereign's hand reached over and clasped the tip of the spear. He couldn't help grunting as his hands were both instantly bloodied. The dragon scales on his skin had been pierced by the spear's blade. His magic power is inferior to mine. Break! Dragon-rearing sovereign's body started to expand, his body instantly surpassing the river valleys. Standing 300 yards tall, he lifted the spear with brute force, and his body spun rapidly. At that moment, the might of the water dragon spear that was stabbing down burst forth and spun crazily as well. Its dragon roar became incomparably resounding the instant both of them exploded with power. The huge dragon spear crumbled and transformed into streams of water that came crashing down. Dragon-rearing sovereign was completely drenched, his mangled palms trembling. He had only managed to break the opponent's spear because the other person's magic power was inferior to his. However, the power in that person's spear was extremely great, and it was even imbued with the power from surging river. With surging river pressuring from the top, it had been too much. When the might of the spear was added into the mix, his hands were injured. Before dragon-rearing sovereign could even have a chance to catch his breath, an incomparably thick dragon spear came rushing at him again. Dragon-rearing sovereign dodged, but yet another dragon spear came from the surging river in the sky. His body moved repeatedly toward the west, avoiding strike after strike along the river bed. Whenever the thick dragon spears came from the sky, their power would suddenly retract, not a drop of it leaking out. Instead, they would strike the crucial points and fix the power of surging river's dragon vein in place. A Dao spell experts. Dragon-rearing sovereign was secretly astonished. Every strike of Blind's fixed the points of Surging River's dragon vein in place, preventing him from executing its power. Without the god's magic power holding it up, Surging River started to fall. However, it had risen quite high, so it would still take some time for it to land back into the riverbed. His control to Dao spells is truly intricate. He is no inferior to that heavenly worker of few words. Cold sweat broke out on dragon-rearing Sovereign's forehead. The dragon spears that came from the sky become more and more concentrated, slowly taking away his ability to dodge. He had no choice but to fight, which earned him numerous injuries. More and more crucial points of the dragon vein were fixed in place by Blind. The flood dragons upstream and downstream of Surging River were quite a distance away, so dragon-rearing Sovereign couldn't call them back in time to borrow their strength. Meanwhile, the divine flood dragon king had been already dispatched. Dragon-rearing Sovereign had recently had a fierce battle with Mute, and they were both experts. They had tried all they could to get rid of each other, and he had severely exhausted his vital chi. Until then, his vital chi still had yet to completely recover, and to change the path of Surging River, he'd exhausted his magic power as well. With Blind holding on to the moment, he was defeated again and again, getting injured repeatedly. Meanwhile, in the Surging River above, Blind held onto his bamboo cane as he stepped on a water dragon to fly through the river's surface. The water behind him churned, and an incomparably huge apparition rose. It was a huge black tortoise god, cultivated close to the substance state. The black tortoise god was an old man with a tortoise shell. A flying serpent was coiled around his body while flapping his wings, in a pose as though it was about to fly away. Qin Mu found it familiar. The black tortoise god was Blind's primordial spirit, and it was similar to black tortoise god statue. Only the face was different. Qin Mu was mischievous when he was young and had peed on all 4 statues in the village. Even the black tortoise stone statue had been peed on quite a lot. On the river surface, Blind moved as though he was flying, and the bamboo cane in his hand kept stabbing on the water's surface as he fought with dragon-rearing Sovereign. It was Qin Mu's first time seeing Blind fighting with his full strength. Back when Qin Feiyue had entered great ruins through Surging River, Blind had given a tap with his bamboo cane against Surging River's surface, which caused it to pulse a few times. However, Qin Feiyue was only an expert of 7 Stars realm at that time, so Blind had only been scaring him. He didn't use his full strength. But at that moment, Blind had unleashed all he had to fight with dragon-rearing Sovereign across the river surface. Every time his bamboo cane tapped on the water, there would be a huge pillar rushing down to the bottom. The water would frantically transform into a dragon spear. Every one of them would stab at the flaws of dragon-rearing Sovereign's divine arts, exhausting him with the struggle of dodging the attacks. Blind had his own unique mental cultivation method to execute his 9 Heavens Eye Awakening skill, but he didn't impart it to Qin Mu. His mental cultivation method wasn't the best in the village, but 9 Heavens Eyes Awakening skill was the strongest in the world. What he used on the enemy was none other than that very same skill. However, his Eyes Awakening skill didn't just simply cultivate the 9 heavens. It also cultivated divine mind eyes. Under their gaze, even a god like dragon-rearing Sovereign was full of flaws. Blind's magic power was indeed not equal to that of dragon-rearing Sovereign. Even when the other had exhausted a large amount of their magic power in changing the dragon vein, Blind was still inferior. If dragon-rearing Sovereign controlled flood dragons once again, borrowing their strength and magic power, his reserves would be 10 times greater than those of Blind. Yet Blind's strongest attack was his divine mind eyes that could see through all divine arts. Even if there were no flaws, he could still find some. In regards to cultivation, the density of Blind's magic power was inferior to that of Village Chief, Old Ma, Mute, Butcher, and even Granny C when her heart devil erupted. His magic power only surpassed that of Apothecary and Cripple. In regards to the power of his divine arts, they were inferior even to Deaf's painting. When compared to Village Chief, Butcher, and Old Ma, they were still slightly inferior. However, other than Village Chief and the mysterious Mute, no one else would dare to say they would hold an advantage in front of Blind. Once divine mind eyes were out, his moves were invincible. All the divine arts in the world would be broken with one cane. Rat of the martial world, do you only dare to hide? Why don't you come down and have a battle with me? Dragon-rearing sovereign's voice came from below the riverbed. There was already some water in the riverbed, and it was very muddy. The god was forced to hide from Blind's spears, but he could never escape from the riverbed. Blind's spears always forced him back into the middle. By then, the water in the riverbed was mixed with God's blood and mud, turning it into a quagmire. There were numerous loaches skipping in the water, absorbing the god's blood to transform into loach dragons. They pounced around in the mud, looking ferocious as they bared their fangs and brandished their claws. You really think I don't dare to? Blind shouted and suddenly left Qin Mu and the rest to pass through the water to attack Dragon-rearing Sovereign who was in the middle of the riverbed. A water dragon flew out to sweep Qin Mu and the rest onto the Dragon Qian's back. The divine treasures of Qin Mu and the rest were sealed, and without magic power, they could not stand on the water's surface. The Dragon Qian's cultivation was still there, however, so he could carry all of them. Si Yunxiang and Ling Yuxiu were astonished. They stamped their feet and said, "Why is Grandpa Blind so reckless, being spurred into action by a few negative remarks? How can he face the opponent head-on?" Delighted, Qin Mu smiled. If Dragon-rearing Sovereign doesn't die, he's going to be severely injured. Grandpa Blind isn't a strong practitioner of divine arts because he's from the battle technique school. The two girls were stunned. The old blind man was from the battle technique school? In what way did those spears earlier look like they were from the battle technique school? The experts of battle technique school could explode with astonishing strength in close combat, instantly unleashing all their strength which was gathered in their knives or body. Yet the spears that Blind had used earlier had astonishing power. He was clearly an expert of spells and divine art school. Qin Mu and the two girls leaned on the Dragon Qian's head to look down. Qin Mu saw Hu Linger, who had returned to her original form, still sleeping soundly, so he immediately grabbed her into his arms, afraid that she might drop into the water. The river was clear, and the bottom could also be seen clearly. At that moment, the river water was getting nearer and nearer to the ground. Not long later, the entire river would fall back into the riverbed. Over there, Blind's size was insignificant compared to that of Dragon-rearing Sovereign, who was 300 yards tall. However, he was extremely agile and moved rapidly. A human and a god fought in the mud. Blind flew around in the sky at a very fast speed, prancing around Dragon-rearing Sovereign to avoid his attacks. The bamboo cane in his hand tapped on the air rapidly, and his spear was akin to a dragon and lightning, striking Dragon-rearing Sovereign's body at a speed that couldn't be caught by the naked eye. And surging river that was falling from the sky finally reached the ground. The massive amount of water crashed down with a world-shaking splash. Blind's cane tapped on the heart of Dragon-rearing Sovereign's brows, leaving right after. Dragon-rearing Sovereign stood in the spot in a daze. Then the water crashed down on him. It was hard to say how many explosions came from his whole body. His bones instantly broke and tendons snapped as he got submerged underwater. Above the river, the Dragon Qian rose into the air to avoid the terrifying impact of all the water crashing back down. It spread out and surging river churned as its waves surged into the sky. In the meantime, beside the river, Blind stood on a reef with his cane. He stretched it out to tap on the agitated river's surface, and it calmed down. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 384. Burst with Joy. When the river water landed, the mountains in the surroundings shook from the impact and some of them even crumbled. Landslides came crashing down and caused extremely terrifying damage. Quite a number of villagers living nearby suffered from it. However, Blind was helpless in that. If he didn't get rid of Dragon-rearing Sovereign and cut him off from changing the dragon's vein, the ones who would suffer wouldn't just be the villagers living beside the river. The whole Eternal Peace Empire would feel it. Grandpa Blind, Dragon-rearing Sovereign, is able to shed skin to heal his injuries. While standing on the head of the Dragon Qian, he even added, "Don't be careless. He's still not dead yet." Blind was slightly puzzled. "What did you say about this eel sovereign? I shattered his limbs and bones, broke all his scales, and even ended his life with surging river crashing down on him. How could he still be alive? He's not dead, Qin Mu shouted loudly. As long as you don't chop off his head, no matter how severe his injuries are, they will heal completely after he'll shed his skin. At that moment, the river water suddenly bulged up and came surging down from the upstream, raising waves that were like mountain peaks. A behemoth was swimming underwater. That divine flood dragon king of Il Sovereign has arrived. Looks like Il Sovereign is really not dead yet. Astonished, Blind raised his bamboo cane to tap on the river. Dragon rearing Sovereign was pressed down by the mass of water when it had fallen from the sky. The huge pressure and Blind's attacks were enough to shatter his body into pieces. Just as Blind's cane tapped on the surface of surging river, the sapphire blue divine flood dragon king's body coiled. Its huge head popped out from the water to clash with the cane. Boom! Surging river was cut off, and the deep riverbed was revealed. The dragon Qilin flew upwards to avoid the aftermath of that strike. Qin Mu leaned down the dragon Qilin's back to look below and saw that dragon rearing Sovereign was in a large and deep pit. The mud within it had been blown away by the attacks of Blind and the divine flood dragon king. Dragon rearing Sovereign was sprawled out on his back and looked extremely miserable. However, just Qin Mu had expected, he was not yet dead, but was casting off his skin. Qin Mu quickly took a closer look and saw that the head of dragon rearing Sovereign had already split open. A new one was currently squirming in the crack, trying to worm its way out. If dragon rearing Sovereign succeeds in casting his skin and joins the fight with divine flood dragon king, Grandpa Blind will definitely not be his match. He didn't have time to think. He suddenly jumped down from the dragon Qilin's back and ran frantically toward dragon rearing Sovereign, who was lying at the bottom of the river. Si Yunxiang and Ling Yuxiu cried out in astonishment and stretched out their hands to catch him. But they caught nothing. They didn't manage to grab hold of Qin Mu. Bang! Qin Mu's speed became faster and faster. In a split second, he surpassed the speed of sound and only left a trail of white smoke behind himself. Blind had sealed his 3 great divine treasures, preventing him from using his vital qi. However, heaven-pilfering divine legs was a corporeal body divine art. It was one that would burst forth with the strength of the corporeal body. Blind was unable to seal that. Qin Mu sprinted down from the sky with a whoosh and went straight for dragon rearing Sovereign. Meanwhile, the water of surging river was starting to merge together. Black Tortoise Primordial Spirit appeared behind Blind's back and fought with the divine flood dragon king. Blind saw Qin Mu sprinting down from the sky and couldn't help scolding him in his heart for being too daring. He hurriedly gave a flick. Qin Mu was in midair when he got flicked in the heart of his brow by a gust of wind. Instantly, 3 rumbles came from his body, and his spirit embryo, 5 elements, and 6 directions divine treasures opened up one after another. His magic power returned to his body, and he couldn't help being overjoyed. Beside the shore, Blind was attacking frantically, pitting his life against the divine flood dragon king, so that Qin Mu wouldn't be smacked to death with a tail. He's still so daring after having his divine treasures sealed by me. This rascal. Why didn't I see him being so energetic in bed? Blind's brows fluttered in the breeze. He was truly furious. The divine flood dragon king's claws came down on him only to be tapped several times by his bamboo cane. The muscles and bones in the dragon's claw were thrown in disorder so their power couldn't be released. Blind's cane tapped again, and the river water swirled and gathered to form a huge spear which went straight for the divine flood dragon king's heart. The creature had no choice but to rise into the sky to avoid the strike. PSHH. Before the river water totally merged, Qin Mu dived into the mud at the bottom of the river. What followed was a world-shaking rumble as the river water collided and converged. The sight of huge waves overflowing into the sky and surging toward the east was spectacular. Under the river, Qin Mu held his breath, but the pressure of the river water converging still almost crushed him to death. His chest almost caved inwards, and his ears kept on ringing. After a moment, Qin Mu came back to his senses and tunneled out from the mud. His body moved like a fish and came to the pit where dragon rearing Sovereign lay. surging river was currently transporting mud and sand which continued to accumulate in the pit, burying almost half of dragon-rearing sovereign. Qin Mu swam toward the god's side and saw mushy flesh everywhere. Even the god's blood was pushed out by the pressure and swept away by the water. In just a short time, over half of it had been swept away. The body of a god was very dense and heavy. Even strong practitioners of divine bridge realm would find it difficult to carry one and walk, so dragon-rearing sovereign was not swept away by the current and just lay there. Even when most of his blood had been drained, his head was still squirming. 2 dragons' horns had already popped out. Qin Mu stretched his hands forward to swim around dragon-rearing sovereign's body to flip it around. Where's the true dragon's nest? Where did he hide it? Gotcha. Dragon-rearing sovereign's head split open wider, and waves of gods might came from the crack. Astonished, Qin Mu saw that the dragon's head had already wormed halfway out. He quickly swam to dragon-rearing sovereign's bald head while pulling out his carefree sword. Mobilizing his 3 great divine treasures and rousing his vital qi, he stabbed dragon-rearing sovereign's head with force, only to hear a clink when carefree sword came into contact with a dragon's scale and got bounced back. A crack appeared on it, but that was it. Qin Mu raised his hands to stab a dozen more times until he finally pierced the scale. Qin Mu pulled his sword out to stab down again. Carefree sword went halfway into dragon-rearing sovereign's head. Qin Mu then took out a huge iron hammer to smash forcefully on the sword's hilt. After pounding it for quite some time, he finally stabbed Carefree sword all the way through dragon-rearing sovereign's head. Carefree sword had nailed dragon-rearing sovereign's skin and the corporeal body that was casting off the skin. The dragon's head didn't dare to squirm, afraid of alarming the gods might hidden in the sword. Could only slowly cast off the skin, but once it was fixed in place by Carefree sword, even that option was out. Honest-looking boy, it's you again. Dragon-rearing sovereign opened his mouth to speak in a weak voice. I want to kill you. I must kill you. Qin Mu circulated his vital qi and swept up mud and sand to stuff his mouth and nose so he couldn't speak. He then took out the last of his 3 break powder and wrapped it up with his vital qi to stuff it into the mouth as well before searching around again. Even if I can't poison you to death, I can still make you cast your skin one more time. Qin Mu flipped over the god's body to find the true dragon's nest. Dragon-rearing sovereign's nearly stiff body trembled continuously. It was the so-called taking advantage of you when one is weak. The toxicity of 3 break powder erupted, and it was truly powerful, causing cracking sounds to come from the already broken body as it broke once more along with the spirit and soul. Dragon-rearing sovereign hadn't yet completely cast off his skin, so he wasn't yet separated from it, and his new body was instantly poison. It was truly miserable beyond words. Qin Mu found strange and weird items like dragon skin drum, dragon's horns, claw staff, dragon bone short flute on dragon-rearing sovereign's body, but he could not find the nest of the true dragon lord. Weird. This guy had to have hidden it on his body, so it's impossible for it to go missing. Qin Mu took out the Emperor's disc to sense it, but it couldn't sense anything. He then tried to activate the Emperor's disc a few more times, and the writings on the Emperor's disc changed, but he still couldn't find the location of the dragon's nest. At that moment, he suddenly felt an abnormal motion in the currents around him. The river water was very murky as the mud and sand were being swept up by the currents. Thus his vision was very limited. Qin Mu then quickly flew to dragon-rearing sovereign's head and supported himself with the hilt of the sword as he looked around carefully. Another torrential current rushed past his body, but he remained motionless. He saw an incomparably thick dragon's body with dark green scales. Each and every one of them was larger than his body. It was a flood dragon that should have been reared by dragon-rearing sovereign. It was attracted over by its master's aura. That flood dragon was incomparably powerful, even stronger than ordinary existences of the cult master level, so Qin Mu was definitely no match for it. His gaze flickered, and his other hand took out the dragon bone short flute he had found on dragon-rearing sovereign's body. He secretly used vital qi to have the water current blow the short flute. He wanted to use secrets of dragon control to establish a connection with the flood dragon to control it. At that moment, his mind was suddenly attacked, and he gained a splitting headache. dragon-rearing sovereign had roused the last of his consciousness to strike his mind, nearly causing him to faint. While suffering from the pain, Qin Mu saw dragon-rearing sovereign, who was under his feet, squirming with all his strength, so carefree sword swayed back and forth. From the motions, the blade had even sliced apart dragon-rearing sovereign's scalp. You can still shed your skin after eating so much three-break powder? My poison is indeed inferior to that of Grandpa Apothecary. If it was a poison refined by him, dragon-rearing sovereign would have died even if he'd cast off his skin 10 times. Qin Mu immediately tried to pull out his sword, but how could he do that when he had pounded it in with an iron hammer? It would require him quite some time to pull it out. A dragon's head was worming out from dragon-rearing sovereign, even if there was still a carefree sword stuck in it. Qin Mu stood on the head of dragon-rearing sovereign, his hands gripping the sword's hilt. Beneath his feet were the god's big eyes. They were open and looking straight at him. The god's face was green, which was the sign of him being poisoned. He was using all his strength to suppress three-break poison. Meanwhile, behind Qin Mu, a huge dragon's head appeared, its body coiled in the water. The dark green flood dragon opened its mouth, revealing the sharp teeth inside. Qin Mu's eyeballs swiveled left and right as he secretly stretched his hand out to grasp the emperor's disc. He quickly shone it backward, at the huge mouth of the dark green flood dragon who had already come to the top of his head. The sharp teeth were inches away from his head. Qin Mu raised the emperor's disc up high, even if his legs were trembling. Below him, dragon-rearing sovereign was still trying his best to squirm out. Clack, clack, clack. Qin Mu opened his mouth to say something, but he only heard his teeth clattering. Bubbles flowed out of his mouth as he said, "Don't move. Be nice." The mouth of the dark green dragon stopped, then slowly moved back. The creature's gaze fell on the emperor's disc. Maha! The flood dragon slowly lowered its head. Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief and stomped on dragon-rearing sovereign's eye. He shouted ferociously, "You almost killed me. Tell me quickly, where have you hidden the true dragon's nest? I have hundreds of poisons here, so do you really believe that I won't turn you into ashes?" Dragon-rearing sovereign looked at him coldly, continuing with his squirming action. Suddenly, a crack sounded from his head as another dragon's head came worming out. He had suffered from Qin Mu's poison, and shedding his skin once was not enough to detox himself. He had to cast his skin off once more. Maha maha! The dark green flood dragon behind Qin Mu shrunk in size and climbed onto his shoulders. With its 2 claws on his shoulder, it opened its mouth, shocking Qin Mu. He saw the true dragon's nest resting inside. "Sly, you are truly sly." Qin Mu burst out with joy while giving dragon-rearing sovereign a thumbs up. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 385. River Suppression Dragon. If dragon-rearing sovereign had hidden the true dragon's nest somewhere else, Qin Mu wouldn't have praised him for being sly. One has to know that in disabled elderly village, being called sly is definitely a big praise. If dragon-rearing sovereign had hidden the true dragon's nest on his body or that of the divine flood dragon king, it would be something regular people would think of, so it would be easy for one to find it. However, hiding it in dark green flood dragon's mouth was an irregular thought process which was praiseworthy. That's why Qin Mu was not stingy with his praises for dragon-rearing sovereign. The god, however, ignored him and continued to cast off his skin as he tried his best to worm out. As long as he cast off the 2 layers of skin, he would be able to get rid of Qin Mu and snatch the true dragon lord and its nest back. Qin Mu touched the dark green flood dragon on his shoulder, and it rubbed its head against his palm while giving off a cry that sounded like a baby. Maha! Qin Mu executed secrets of dragon control to establish a connection with the dark green flood dragon and gave it carefree sword, wanting to control it to kill dragon-rearing sovereign. However, that flood dragon didn't dare to make a move on the god and actually broke free from the mental control. The dark green flood dragon was not only raised by dragon-rearing sovereign, but also had a natural fear of him, which was why it didn't dare to attack him. Yet with Qin Mu's own ability, he couldn't land a fatal blow even if he wielded a divine sword in his hand. He could at most pierce the skin. Dragon-rearing sovereign's injuries were extremely heavy, and what he suffered from were fatal blows. Blind strikes had wounded him way too deeply, and with Qin Mu personally feeding him poison, he had to go through 2 metamorphoses in order to erase all his injuries. Even if he succeeded, his vitality would still be greatly reduced. My 3-break powder is finished, and there's no time to refine more poison. Even though Fatty Dragon is on Celestial Being Realm, it'd be difficult for him to use Carefree Sword to kill Dragon-rearing Sovereign. Then why don't I try the power of Sun Jade Eye? When he thought of that, he reached his hand to take the Sun Jade Eye out, but midway through the motion, he changed his mind. He took out Moon Jade Eye from his Taotai sack instead. In Surging River, the currents were fierce. What Sun Jade Eye could shoot was an incomparably intense beam of fire, so its power would definitely be weakened when coming into contact with water. On the other hand, Moon Jade Eye's power was still a mystery. However, it would certainly not be afraid of water, so it could still unleash its full power even underwater. Qin Mu came to Dragon-rearing Sovereign's neck and placed the huge eyeball on the skin. The god ignored him, still trying his best to morph. Qin Mu adjusted the direction of Moon Jade Eye and aiming it at the neck of Dragon-rearing Sovereign. He then started to adjust it. It was his first time using Moon Jade Eye. He had tested the power of Sun Jade Eye before, and its power was extremely strong. It sliced apart Bent Mountain Shrine and destroyed the space underwater. When he had been designing Sunshot Divine Cannon for Emperor Yanfeng, he had also taken reference from the structure of Sun Jade Eye and absorbed numerous concepts of forging from it. After all, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had only taught him the cultivation methods of Sunshot Divine Eyes, so he didn't have any records of any divine cannon. Qin Mu had derived some structure designs from the Sun Jade Eye, and only then was he able to transform Sunshot Divine Eyes into Sunshot Divine Cannon. He deduced that Bent Mountain Shrine should have most likely come from an era before founding Emperor era. He based that on the fact that it had numerous runes that had a big difference from the current runes and those used during founding Emperor era. After studying Moon Jade Eye for some time, he activated it. He saw it open slowly, and the huge eyeball gradually lighted up as though a clear and round moon was hidden in it. Both Sunshot Divine Eyes and Sunshot Divine Cannon required energy to be provided for them, so Qin Mu had forged numerous pill furnaces to support them. However, there was no similar structure in Moon Jade Eye or Sun Jade Eye, and this had made Qin Mu pondered over it for quite some time. However, he still didn't know from where the energy was coming. He had a few wild guesses. First, there might really be a sun or a moon hidden in the 2 eyes, providing the 2 jade eyes with boundless energy. However, this guess was simply too outrageous, and Qin Mu didn't believe it himself either. The second guess was more reliable, and that was that the ancient humans or gods had mastered a kind of strange formation that could absorb energy from heaven and earth. However, the flaw in this guess lay in the fact that when Qin Mu activated the jade eyes, he couldn't feel any unknown energy moving in the surroundings. He still had a third guess, but it was simply ridiculous. He thought that Sun Jade Eyes and Moon Jade Eyes might actually be treasures of space teleportation. However, they were much more complicated than the teleportation formation, closer to a teleportation door. That kind of treasure required a huge door to be built on either the surface of the sun or the surface of the moon, and another door to be built in the jade eyes. The energy of the sun and the moon would be released through those doors when the eyes opened. If this was how the terrifying attacks were created, there would really be no need for a treasure to provide energy to it. However, this guess was too outrageous. Who would be able to fly to the sun and the moon? Furthermore, based on the calculations of Qin Mu and the rest, the astronomical phenomenons were all fake, and that included the sun and the moon. They were all painted on the sky. It was impossible for anyone to leave, so how could they build a teleportation door on the sun and the moon? He wanted to dismantle the jade eyes to look at their structure, but he didn't dare to do so. Finally, the energy had finished gathering in Moon Jade Eye. Qin Mu controlled it, and the pupil shot out a beam of light that was as straight as a thin blade. Dragon-rearing Sovereign had almost pulled himself out, so when the blade of light sliced through his neck, there was nothing strange. Yet there was a side effect. Wherever it passed, an incomparably thin sheet of ice would form. The ice covering was so long that its end could not be seen, and it had separated the bottom of Surging River. There were quite a lot of fish and water monsters swimming in the river when one huge fish was sliced apart by the ice wall that had no thickness. However, that fish monster seemed to not have felt it and continued to swim. Yet its body separated from the center, and it became two pieces of swimming fish. There was no fresh blood leaking out, and Qin Mu could even clearly see the beast's organs and brain tissue. Two halves of the fish monster swam to and fro, not knowing that they had already been sliced in half. Qin Mu was stunned, not understanding what had happened. Could this moon jade I have no power, just able to slice people apart? Why are they not dead after being cut in half? He was puzzled. Could the injuries of the fish monster be frozen, so that's why no blood flowed out? However, the area that froze has to be very thin. Otherwise, the fish wouldn't be able to move. Suddenly, blood started to flow out of the two halves of the fish monster. The frozen wounds had to have melted, for the water started to reek of blood. Soon, the fish monster that was in two halves was devoured by others until only its bones were left. Dragon-rearing sovereign who was casting his skin off had long stopped squirming. He remained motionless, only his eyeballs rolling around. He saw the state of the fish monster and his blood ran cold. Qin Mu adjusted the jade eye and sliced another fish monster through the center. It was also cut in half. Qin Mu's vital qi surged out and swept the two halves of the fish monster over, and he pieced them together. The fish monster connected and swam away. Qin Mu was stunned, then became overjoyed. There's still such an effect of moon jade eye. Dragon-rearing sovereign's eyeballs rolled around disorderly, his body behind the neck not crawling forward. It was crawling back instead. He tried to shed off the two layers of skin like that. Dragon sovereign, don't move. Qin Mu raised the jade eye up and circled it around his neck. Dragon-rearing sovereign remained motionless, his dragon eyes filled with fear. A white line that went around his neck took shape. Qin Mu tried to push at the neck, but it was completely unmovable, so he took out a huge iron hammer and smashed it along the white line. Gotcha! A crisp sound rang out, and dragon-rearing sovereign's scalp instantly turned numb. He croaked, "Hold it!" Qin Mu raised his huge hammer again and smashed it down heavily. Another crack rang out, and dragon-rearing sovereign shouted himself hoarse. "Hold it! I have something to say." Qin Mu stopped and asked curiously, "What does Dragon Sovereign want to say? What's the benefit in killing me?" Dragon-rearing sovereign said carefully to prevent his neck from being broken by the tremors. "Even if you kill me, you will still attract the revenge of high heavens. There will be stronger gods than me that will descend. They will find you, kill you, and change the path of surging river to make eternal peace another great ruins." Qin Mu swung his hammer down and said, "Different situations call for different actions. I will just have to kill them first." "Hold it. We high heavens are just watchdogs. If a god dies, it's fine, but if two gods will die, the true gods will be alarmed. The consequences of that will be the wiping out of the world," Dragon-rearing sovereign stated. "I have no grudge with you and have only come down because of an order. So why must we pit ourselves against each other until one of us dies?" Qin Mu stopped and smiled. "How is the extermination of eternal peace related to me? I'm from great ruins, so if eternal peace becomes another great ruins, I will feel freer instead. Moreover, if I let you off, what if you still want to kill me? You won't speak good of eternal peace after you return to high heavens, so why should I leave you alive?" Dragon-rearing sovereign's face flickered between darkness and clarity. He then gritted his teeth and said, "I can make an oath to earth count. After you let me go, I will definitely not take revenge on you." Qin Mu raised his huge hammer. "If it's just not taking revenge, you won't be able to take revenge after I kill you as well." Dragon-rearing sovereign's voice trembled. "Hold it. I can teach you how to collect dragon veins and mobilize the true power of the true dragon lord." Qin Mu put down his iron hammer, his gaze sparkling. "What else?" The muscles on dragon-rearing sovereign's face twitched, but he still said, "I can guard surging river's dragon vein and work for you." Qin Mu's face was solemn. "Swear to earth count." Dragon-rearing sovereigns gritted his teeth. "I'll swear an oath to earth count." Qin Mu smiled and put away his iron hammer, but still held on to Moon Jade Eye. He transformed into Saturn Sovereign that had a human head and a snake's body. Behind him appeared the Gate of Heaven Influence. The two doors opened up and revealed the sinister darkness of Yudu. You can now make an oath to Earth count, but don't play any tricks. I've already made an oath to Earth count once, so even if you'll try to play any tricks, you won't be able to trick an honest man like me, Qin Mu said solemnly. Honest man. The corner of dragon-rearing Sovereign's eyes twitched, but he could only make an oath. He recited the oath about guarding Surging River and not rebelling word for word. At that time, his true form revealed itself, and his body swelled up to transform into a huge flood dragon that was 300 yards long. Black chi surrounded his body and transformed into chains. One end was connected to Surging River and the other to his soul. If he went back on his oath, that chain would pull his soul into Yudu and he would die. Qin Mu carefully studied the words in his oath to check that there were no loopholes. He then smiled and said, "When the ice line around your neck melts, your body will still be complete. Call back your divine flood dragon king and guard Surging River properly." The huge flood dragon that was dragon-rearing sovereign had a huge head like a mountain. He looked at Qin Mu with a complicated expression. "I keep calling you an honest-looking boy, but that's not your name. May I ask who you are?" Qin Mu took the dark green flood dragon to the river surface with him, and his voice came from above, somewhat distorted by the water. Qin Mu of Disabled Elderly Village, Heavenly Devil Cult Master, the current human emperor. Dragon-rearing sovereign was stunned, then asked in a low voice, "So it's human emperor, who taught you like that? You are way harder to deal with than the sword god back then." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 386. Technique to Seize Fate. While Qin Mu rose from the water, a huge flood dragon swam past him, diving into the depths. It was none other than the divine flood dragon king. Qin Mu stopped, noticing a bamboo stick stuck in the forehead of the sapphire blue flood dragon. It was bubbling with blood. Grandpa Blind's bamboo cane. Qin Mu rose from the river and walked toward the shore. The dragon Qilin brought over a dozen flood dragons while carrying Ling Yuxiu, Hu Linger, and Si Yunxiang carefully. The battle between Blind and the divine flood dragon king had to have just ended. They had avoided the aftermath of the fight, so they were slightly slow to get close. Hu Linger had finally sobered up and was looking around curiously. She didn't know how she had ended up there from the banquet in town, so she was very puzzled. Qin Mu looked around and saw Blind. At that moment he looked very miserable, all covered in mud. His clothes were disheveled, and there were wounds all over his body. It was evident that he'd faced an extremely tough battle with the divine flood dragon king. That creature was extremely strong. It was a flood dragon that had become a god after all. It possessed remarkable abilities, and it was also a water attribute flood dragon. Blind had used all his power and made life difficult for the divine flood dragon king, but he'd gotten injured as well. The dragon Qilin flew over and landed on the ground. Hu Linger jumped down from his back, still in the form of a small fox. She skipped and jumped onto Qin Mu's shoulder, and only then noticed the dark green flood dragon on the other shoulder, which caused her hair to stand on ends. Even her tail became straight. When she got drunk, she would return back to her true form, and upon waking up, she forgot to transform back into a human as well. "Linger, don't be scared. This is a flood dragon I just recruited. It has even done a huge credit." Qin Mu consoled the little fox while taking a glance at Blind. He blinked and beamed at him. "Sister Yuxiu, Saint Xiang, let me show you a big fella." The two girls were very curious and asked, "What big fella?" Qin Mu stood beside the river and shouted loudly, "River Suppression Dragon King, aren't you coming out?" Waves surged forward and overflowed into the sky. The huge dragon that was dragon-rearing sovereign raised its head from the river, tall as a mountain. His long whiskers hung by his nose, sparkling and translucent, fluttering in the wind. They were 300 yards long and beautiful. Dragon-rearing sovereign hung his head down. "Does your majesty have any instructions?" The two women were stunned, and Blind was also astonished. Qin Mu was pleased with himself as he looked around. When he saw everyone's expression, he crossed his arms over his chest. He smiled and said, "Nothing much. I just wanted you to come out and meet everyone." With a solemn face, dragon-rearing sovereign endured the urge to slap the little thing with one palm. As he was about to sink back into the water, Qin Mu said, "Hold on. Don't be in a hurry to leave. You had promised to teach me how to collect dragon veins and how to mobilize the power of the true dragon lord." Dragon-rearing sovereign immediately stopped, no longer sinking into the water. Qin Mu proudly looked over. "Grandpa Blind, how's that?" "Beyond awesome." Blind was full of smiles. Qin Mu's gaze flickered, and he secretly took out a golden flute. He then executed secrets of dragon control so numerous flood dragons flew toward Blind. They were all extremely powerful, and if they tied Blind up, he would definitely be unable to move. But at that moment, Blind suddenly flicked his finger, and Qin Mu gave a grunt. The three great divine treasures in his body were sealed up once again. The sound of the flute stopped, and the flood dragons looked around in a daze. They didn't attack Blind. "Muer, you're being too awesome for your own good." Blind gave another flick, and golden rope flew out to tie his arms and legs. He sighed. "Each age brings forth a new genius on this noble land. Yet the younger generations always die on the sandy beach. The ginger gets spicier as it gets older. You were too slow in making your move, trying to control the flood dragons to tie me up? It's not that simple." Qin Mu fell to the ground, his face black like charcoal. Just as he wanted to order dragon-rearing sovereign to take Blind down, his mouth was stuffed with a piece of cloth, making him unable to talk. "The wedding has to continue, and the child has to be born." Blind picked him up and said to dragon-rearing sovereign, "Ferry us back to Great Ruins by following the river. We will go back to the village to continue the wedding. There are still 2 brides, and if you organize it nicely, I'll treat you to the wedding banquet." Dragon-rearing sovereign hesitated for a moment while looking at Qin Mu. Muffled cries came from the youth's mouth as he tried to struggle. However, after a moment, the boy just nodded in submission. Dragon-rearing sovereign secretly felt happy. This honest-looking boy is so crafty, yet there's a time when he's at a disadvantage too. Serves him right. He bent down, presenting him his long back. It was like a narrow island on the water. "Come onto my back," he shouted. Blind carried Qin Mu onto the dragon's back, and the dragon Qilin hurriedly came over as well. Numerous flood dragons that were bustling with activities squeezed into a ball too. "These are the flood dragons I raised. They are all freeloaders." Dragon-rearing sovereign felt another pang of pain, but the incident was already beyond any salvaging. If he could redo everything, he would send a fatal blow to Qin Mu the first time he met him, killing the honest virgin boy with a slap. On the dragon's back, Qin Mu seemed to have already accepted his fate and didn't struggle anymore. He also didn't try to make dragon-rearing sovereign make a move. Thus, Blind took out the cloth in his mouth and said, "Have the eel sovereign teach you." Qin Mu stretched out his hands, and Blind took off the golden rope. However, the portion on his legs remained. Qin Mu's gaze wavered. "Why is Grandpa Blind so careful? I'm just learning how to collect dragon veins from dragon-rearing sovereign and need magic power for that. Besides, the flood dragons are already hungry, so I need to refine pills to feed them. Can I run away if you undo the seals on me? Even if I want to run, can I escape Grandpa Blind's grasp? Isn't sealing me just as easy as flicking a finger for you?" Blind raised his eyebrows and stretched his hand to tap on the heart of his brows. Qin Mu was delighted as he heard a rumble. His spirit embryo divine treasure was opened, but his 5 elements and 6 directions divine treasures were still sealed. "The vital chi in spirit embryo divine treasure is enough for you to learn," Blind said calmly. Qin Mu sighed with admiration and gave Blind a thumbs up. "As expect of the old and experienced that taught me how to be an adult, always being so careful." Blind's heart burst with joy and he laughed. "Stop flattering me. Go, go." Ling Yuxiu and Si Yunxiang looked at each other in dismay. The teachings in Cowherd Boy's family seemed to be different from the other families. No matter how they saw it, it looked like they were bringing their child to walk an unorthodox path. Qin Mu refined spirit pills and fed the dragons. The dragon Qilin also ate a few mouthfuls, but felt that the taste was wrong. He secretly peeled a scarlet fire spirit pill open, and his face couldn't help turning black. He saw that there was a fire element divine vitality pill in the center of scarlet fire spirit pill. No wonder it was somewhat spicy. Cult Master, these spirit pills are wrong, the dragon Qilin shouted. After that, he peeled open a few more spirit pills and threw the fire element divine vitality pills into the river while eating just the skins. Qin Mu played the golden flute and had the green flood dragon beat the dragon Qilin up. The fatty yelped miserably and didn't dare to be picky anymore. As dragon-rearing sovereign swam toward great ruins, he taught Qin Mu and even more profound secrets of dragon control. The dragon-rearing scriptures he had given Qin Mu had still held some information back. Numerous crucial points had not been recording in them. Qin Mu learned diligently and didn't play any tricks. After half a day, he had learned all of secrets of dragon control and asked on how to mobilize the power of the true Dragon Lord. Dragon-rearing sovereign said, "I have no idea who refined the true Dragon Lord into a treasure, but now it has already become a treasure of fate. Can never become a true dragon. However, placing it into the nest would allow it to absorb the dragon chi there. With a unique technique to absorb the fate of the true Dragon Lord, the cultivation of the person wearing the true Dragon Lord will grow by leaps and bounds. I have never learned this kind of technique before, but I think that the person who wanted to collect the treasure should have imprinted the technique into the true Dragon Lord. After seizing the fate, you will become the true Dragon Lord. A unique technique?" Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He immediately mentioned the 9 Dragons Monarch technique he had learned from Emperor Yanfeng. "Is this kind of technique one to seize fate?" Dragon-rearing sovereign pondered it for a moment, then shook his head. "This kind of technique can only seize the chi, borrowing the dragon chi to cultivate, so it isn't a technique to seize fate. We, the dragon race, are born from heaven and earth and naturally inherit the knowledge of the cosmos, changing it into a language known as the dragon language. Every dragon is naturally proficient in the dragon language, so there's no need to learn it. The writings and runes on the true Dragon Lord and its nest are nothing else but the writings of my dragon race. I only saw the ones on the nest, but from the writings there's indeed a technique that seizes fate written down there. However, it isn't complete." Qin Mu's heart stirred slightly. He should only be able to learn the complete technique to seize fate after putting the Emperor's Disc and the true dragon's nest together. Legend said that a god had conferred Emperor's Disc to the ancestors of Ling family, and that it symbolized the authority of the emperor. The 9 Dragons Monarch technique was then naturally a technique that was comprehended from the emperor's disc. On top of that, a genius like Emperor Yanfeng had been able to perfect 9 Dragons Monarch technique and raise it to a level where it could compete with great educational Heavenly Devil Scriptures and Rulai's Mahayana Sutra. One could well imagine how terrifying would be the technique that combined the writings on the emperor's disc with those on the nest. "Dragon Sovereign, teach me the dragon language," Qin Mu said suddenly. Dragon-rearing sovereign taught him the dragon language he knew and said, "It is actually hidden within the bloodline. The purer the bloodline, the more dragon words one would know. I'm not a true dragon, so there are still some parts that I don't know the meaning of." Qin Mu memorized all the syllables and writings of the dragon language, and his head started to swell. The strokes of the dragon language were strange, and they looked like they were formed by dragons. There was no regular pattern to be seen. Without it, it would be impossible to deduce the meaning of the characters he didn't recognize. Besides that, the method of pronunciation was also different from the human language. They had unusual cadences, and some syllables couldn't be pronounced with the human throat. It was nearly an impossible task for him to want to use the dragon language to converse with dragons. Qin Mu memorized the dragon language as much as he could, then took out the emperor's disc that was hanging around his neck. Looking at it, he was instantly able to understand the meaning of some of the characters and the runes. However, since dragon-rearing sovereign didn't know the whole language, Qin Mu couldn't recognize all that was written. The writings on the emperor's disc changed continuously and made him giddy from reading them. Qin Mu closed his eyes and shook his head. He said in a low voice, Only true dragons will recognize all of the writings of the dragon race. So where can I find a true dragon and ask him to teach me all of the dragon language? There are true dragons in great ruins, dragon-rearing sovereign said. Qin Mu's spirit was greatly aroused. He suddenly raised his head to look forward and saw secret waters pass ahead of them. Dragon-rearing sovereign's speed was truly astounding. In just half a day, he had brought them to great ruins. Secret Waters Pass was blockaded by the army of Eternal Peace Empire. If dragon-rearing sovereign wanted to cross, he had to destroy the whole city. Qin Mu immediately had him stop, and everyone jumped off his back and entered Secret Waters Pass. Feng Shiyun led many people over to welcome Qin Mu and bowed in greeting. We pay our respects to Cult Master. Qin Mu smiled and said, Spare the formalities. It's getting late, so we shall take a rest here before entering Great Ruins tomorrow. Incense Master Feng, please arrange the guest rooms. Blind beamed and said, This girl doesn't look bad. Prepare a banquet. It's the second blooming of your cult master tonight. He will get married. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 387. Grown Up. The whole secret water pass was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Feng Shiyun was swift in handling matters, and soon Xianxia was dressed nicely by a bunch of female soldiers. She wore a phoenix coronet and veil while Qin Mu wore the big red silk ball again. He was forced to bow and get married with Xianxia. Little girl Feng is also not bad. She's quick in handling matters, saving me the trouble. Blind couldn't keep his mouth closed from smiling. He thought to himself, I wonder if she's married. At the wedding banquet, the little girl who lingered tears looked like raindrops on a pear blossom. She hugged her wine jar, unable to even stand straight, crying that Grandpa Blind had lied to him, that he was an old trickster. Numerous soldiers of Secret Waters Pass that had come forth to congratulate the couple looked at one another in dismay as they didn't know why was the 6 to 7-year-old girl whimpering so sorrowfully. After all the joyous activities, the newly wedded couple was sent to the bridal room. Xianxia secretly had hidden a dagger on her body for the time Qin Mu lifted her veil. That would be the moment for her to strike and fulfill her long-cherished wish as the saintess, to assassinate the licentious and tyrannical cult master. After waiting for quite a while, Qin Mu hadn't yet come to her, and a pang of jealousy welled up in her heart. Am I inferior to that fat girl, Ling Yuxiu? Grandpa Blind is blind, but his heart isn't blind. Yet someone's eyes and heart are both blind. Does he only like girls with big chests? She waited for a while more, but Qin Mu still didn't come to sit beside her nor lifted her veil. She secretly raised the veil and saw that Qin Mu was sitting beside the table and studying a book diligently. Xianxia was bitter and angry. On the night of a wedding with a beauty that looked as lovely as a flower, the fool was studying. It was truly outrageous. Xianxia lifted her veil and tossed it aside. She walked forward and smiled. What is Cult Master so engrossed in? Computational Canon of Mysterious Lady. Qin Mu raised his head and invited her to take a seat. He said sincerely, Grandpa Blind always liked to play a fool, so sorry for implicating you to marry me. I know he is worried about my safety and wants me to marry a nice girl and give birth to babies so I would be tied down by a wife and unable to return to eternal peace. He simply doesn't want me to face the dangers in the future. Sister Xiang, allow me to apologize to you for making you suffer along the way. When he finished saying that, he stood up and bowed. Xianxia immediately returned his greeting and said firmly, You have always treated us courteously and didn't take advantage of me nor the princess. I have seen all that, so I naturally know Cult Master's conduct. You are the Cult Master and half a seniority higher than me, so there's no need for the formalities. She was even younger than Qin Mu, only a girl that was 14 years old who had bright eyes and white teeth. The way Xianxia conducted herself always seemed trifling and disrespectful, but when she was serious, she had a bearing that was kind of magnanimous and graceful. The saintess of the Sea family was the alternative choice for the Cult Master. If Heavenly Devil Cult Master were to unfortunately die, she would succeed in his place. Thus she naturally had an extraordinary bearing as well. Cult Master still hasn't said why you want to read Computational Canon of Mysterious Lady, she said while smiling. Qin Mu continued to study while saying, I want to escape Grandpa Blind's grasp, but I definitely can't outrun him. If I poison him, it won't be nice. He's my grandpa after all. That's why I've thought of using a teleportation divine art. Xianxia cried out in astonishment. Cult Master's attainments in algebra have already reached this step? Teleportation divine art was extremely hard to cultivate, and there were not many people who were able to succeed in it in Heavenly Devil Cult. All the hall masters used teleportation flags or teleportation clothes, since if they wanted to succeed in cultivating the teleportation divine art, they would need astonishing attainments in algebra. The difficulty in that divine art was no inferior to that of Dao Sword. To make use of teleportation divine art, the space algebra had to be cultivated to its extreme. Otherwise, a mistake in the calculation would send one to the wrong, dangerous place. But even scarier than that was sending oneself into a rock. One's body would then fuse with it. Yet the most terrifying point was still a different problem. With the teleportation divine art, a person could dissect oneself, leaving pieces in different spaces. The most difficult point of teleportation divine art was calculating the numerous points of teleportation in a split second without making a single mistake. Besides, one would need to continuously calculate while teleporting. The required calculations were so numerous that for them to all be accurate was something nearly impossible. In Heavenly Devil Cult's history, there were quite a few strong practitioners who had crippled, killed, or even went missing because of cultivating teleportation divine art. There were also many who had dissected themselves. What was even more terrifying was that those strong practitioners all had astounding attainments in algebra. Qin Mu studied computational canon and calculated continuously at the same time. He was trying to calculate all the space teleportation points. Dao Master Lin Xian gave me computational canon of Mysterious Lady a few months ago, and I've been studying it since then. As for computational canon of Supreme Mystery, I've already mastered it. Dao Sec's attainments in algebra can be said to be number 1. With two kinds of computational canons together, I will be able to solve the marvel of teleportation divine art. Don't worry, I will be able to understand computational canon of Mysterious Lady by tonight. Once the darkness withdraws from great ruins tomorrow morning, I'll leave with this divine art. Once Grandpa Blind sees that I have left, he naturally won't trouble you girls. Xianxia's expression was complicated when she said gently, Why are you struggling? Even though Grandpa Blind kidnapped us by force and forced us to marry you, you are only thinking about yourself. Have you once asked if we are willing to marry you? Qin Mu stopped calculating and raised his head in astonishment. Under the light of the lamp, Saintess Xiang looked bashful and irresistible. Sister Xiang, are you willing to marry me? Qin Mu asked with his eyes wide open. Xianxia's eyes went down, and she lowered her head bashfully. The beads of the phoenix coronet swayed gently as candlelight reflected off them in a captivating glow. I don't believe. Qin Mu lowered his head down to continue reading the book diligently. There was a dagger hidden in your sleeve just now. If I go to your side, you will stab me, so I don't believe you. Xianxia formed into such tight fists that they crackled, and her teeth creaked from grinding. Suddenly, she pulled out a small dagger and pounced. Qin Mu laughed and rose up. He avoided the dagger and flicked his finger against the blade. Xianxia spun around him, and the red gown of the bride whirled like a red lotus. With cold light flashing in her hand, she attacked Qin Mu frantically. The noise of furniture being smashed came from the bridal room as numerous items were shattered into pieces. How bustling! Blind put down his wine cup, his ears twitching. As he sat calmly, he beamed at Feng Shuyun, who was drinking with him. General Feng, are you married? Qin Mu fought with Xianxia for a moment, until he gained the upper hand. He then snatched her dagger and threw her onto the bed. There, he smacked her but a few times, taking revenge on her for cleaning out his small treasury before going back to studying diligently. Xianxia went under the blanket angrily, her back to him. The sky gradually turned bright while the world in great ruins was shrouded in incomparably dense darkness. Qin Mu had read the book for the whole night, but his vitality was still ample. Xianxia woke up. When she turned over to face Qin Mu, She couldn't help snorting. He turned his head to her and smiled. You snore when you sleep, but it isn't loud, just like the noise of a kitten. It should be something in your throat that's most likely left from qi deviation. I refined a pill for you, so consume it as soon as possible and it'll be cured. Xianxia left the bed and stretched her body. She took the spirit pill. Qin Mu let out a shaky breath, and his gaze flickered. I can definitely escape this time. However, Grandpa Blind only unsealed my spirit embryo divine treasure, so my magic power is still not enough for me to teleport far away. Because of that, I need to use secrets of dragon control in dragon-rearing scriptures to have the flood dragons coil around my body and lend me their magic power. Xianxia jumped in shock. You still want to leave? Qin Mu smiled and said, That is natural. Grandpa Blind thinks that I will die in eternal peace. So I want to prove it to him that I can escape from his hands and thus escape from the great disaster coming in the future. There is nobody in this world that can kill me. He was full of confidence when he pushed open the door. Xianxia walked out with him, only to see Blind standing at the arched doorway to the garden, seemingly smiling at them. Xianxia hurriedly looked at Qin Mu, whose face was also filled with smiles. Blind raised his eyebrows, having gotten a new bamboo cane from somewhere. He tapped it gently against the ground, then said, Muer, granddaughter-in-law, come and eat breakfast. Qin Mu smiled and said, Just in time for breakfast. Xianxia kept feeling that there were sparks crackling nonstop between the two men. Blind clearly didn't have eyes, but she had a feeling that the two were staring at each other and silently competing. On the breakfast table, Ling Yuxiu also appeared as the first wife, the little girl who Linger sulked with her head lowered as she ate. Her displeasure was worn on her face, and her cheeks were puffed up. Nobody could say why exactly she was sulking. Fatty dragon. I'll beat you to death if you're picky. The little girl suddenly blew up at the dragon Qilin, scaring him into nearly flipping over his rice bowl. The small and delicate flood dragons were amused and cried out Maha Maha. The dragon Qilin smiled and said, Sister Linger, I'm not picky. Look, I've already lost half a tail in weight. After breakfast, Blind revealed a smile and raised his eyebrows. He then said leisurely, Muer, Great Ruins is right ahead, so do whatever you want to do. Qin Mu's gaze flickered and he said, Grandpa Blind sealed my 5 elements and 6 directions divine treasures, so how would I dare to do anything? Blind yawned and stretched out his hand to tap him on the heart of his brows. Don't say I didn't give you any chance. 2 loud explosions came from his body, and his 5 elements and 6 directions divine treasures suddenly opened. His magic power flooded back, and he instantly felt power coursing through his body. Grandpa Blind is very confident. Qin Mu narrowed his eyes, and his will to battle blazed. Blind propped himself on his bamboo cane and beamed at him. Not a problem, not a problem. Suddenly, Qin Mu gave a heavy stomp, and incomparably luxurious teleportation formations appeared around his body. They lit up, and his body instantly vanished. Teleportation divine art. He had just vanished when Blind suddenly tapped the ground with his bamboo cane. Qin Mu then fell off midair. The moment he did so, incomparably luxurious formation markings swirled around him again, and he vanished once more. Blind tossed the bamboo cane up, and as if it was a jade it changed in the sky like a green dragon. It tapped numerous times in space, and Qin Mu's teleportation divine art was intercepted again and again, forcing him to keep revealing his traces. Qin Mu's body flickered on and off as he was slowly forced back into the courtyard. Finally, he was forced out by Blind's bamboo cane and landed back into the courtyard. Before his feet could touch the ground, the sound of a flute rang out, and flood dragons pounced on Blind. In an instant, he was bound tightly by them. Blind paid no attention to them. His bamboo cane flew over and tapped gently on the necks of 2 of them. They instantly turned limp, as if they had died. There were also 2 flood dragons that had flown to Qin Mu's feet, and he instantly felt magic power flooding over. His palms then sliced down one after another. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless teleportation formation markings surged out crazily, appearing between him and Blind. The space between the two of them expanded rapidly, flashing with formation runes of all colors. Blind's expression changed slightly, and he gave chase with his bamboo cane. It tapped rapidly and destroyed the runes one after another. Suddenly, however, the formations in the surroundings swept toward Blind, who was in the center. He stopped and let them drown him out. There was a smile on his face. "Muer, you have won." Swoosh! A ray of light flashed, and he was teleported away by the teleportation divine art. Outside Secret Waters Pass, Blind walked out from a ray and looked back at the place. He was silent for a moment, then revealed a smile. "You have grown up." Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 388. Spear God Awakened. The distance Qin Mu had teleported Blind wasn't great, not even a mile away from Secret Waters Pass with great ruins behind him. To Blind, destroying Qin Mu's teleportation wasn't hard, so the boy could only send him that far at most. Blind quietly returned to Secret Waters Pass to find Qin Mu. Without a word, he undid the seals on Ling Yuxiu and Si Yunxiang's divine treasures. Propping himself on his cane, he walked away by himself. Qin Mu was stunned. "Grandpa Blind. Grown up, all grown up." Dark tears trickled out from old Blind's eye sockets, and the faster he walked, the faster they fell. The child he'd raised had finally grown up, and his heart suddenly felt empty and sour. Qin Mu most likely wouldn't be going back to disabled elderly village again. He was no longer the little youth that carried him while training punches. The child he had picked up already had his own ideas and ability to protect himself. His heart was wild, and after seeing the outside world, he wouldn't want to remain in disabled elderly village where there was only a bunch of old men and one old woman. Blind walked so quickly that when Qin Mu rushed to the city walls of Secret Waters Pass, he could only see his grandpa's back that was leaving farther and farther away. It looked a little lonely. The youth's heart was also slightly depressed. He waved his hand, but didn't say anything. Blind had his back toward him, but he seemed to see him wave his hand, so he also waved back. He didn't turn back though. Qin Mu saw Blind lowering his hand after seeming to have wiped his eye sockets with it. He seemed to be clearing his tears. Blind quickly walked through the river, and after a while came to disabled elderly village. There was no one else there, so the place had already become the world of hen dragons. They had laid brood and moved into the houses of village chief, Blind, and the rest. When they saw Blind coming back, one young and proud hen dragon rushed to him for a fight, planning to chase the old blind man out of their territory. After a moment, the bamboo cane pierced through that creature and stripped it of its feathers. It was then roasted on a bonfire while the other hen dragons hid in a corner and shivered. Blind then went to Butcher's room and dug out a few jars of wine. After roasting the hen dragon, he drank with his meal. Once he was full, he threw the chicken bones all over the ground. When he stood up, he reached for his bamboo cane, but it had already turned into ashes by the flames. Stunned, Blind patted the ashes with his hand. He walked to surging river that was outside the village in wide strides. "How many years has it been?" he muttered to himself. "Old brother, how many years have you accompanied me? When I lost and carried you here, village chief said that my heart is defeated and I no longer deserve to have you. He made me put you away, buried in this surging river. He said I would never need to have you in disabled elderly village." Waves rose on the surface of surging river, and a soft rumbling came from the bottom of the river. Ripples spread out into the surroundings with a regular pattern. Blind walked onto the water, his tattered clothes flapping in the wind. "Back then when I abandoned you, my heart was dead. I saw nothing worth living for in this world anymore. In the past, you had followed me because of my strength, my invincibility, my arrogance." While he stood on the river's surface, an incomparably terrifying will to fight suddenly burst forth from his small body. It rushed straight into the sky, and the clouds warped, transforming into a tortoise with a snake coiling around it. The tortoise was black and had a dragon head, while the snake was a flying serpent soaring with 1,000 wings. Suddenly, whispers came from the bottom of the river. It was a strange voice that sounded like the roars of a dragon yet at the same time as the dead whispering. It was the dragon language and also voices from another world. If anyone heard it, they'd feel as if a long and soft body had gradually risen from the river and coiled around Blind's small and thin one. Sa tua, mo-bsa. 11 chumi tua, you've lost? Eyes are blind, don't deserve to have me. I've lost. Blind straightened. His stature was short, and other than village chief and butcher in the past, he was much shorter than everyone in the village. Even though he was small, he gave others a feeling that he was abnormally tall, imposing and straight. Sorrow was on Blind's face as he said in a low voice, "My divine eyes were dug out and my Tao heart was defeated. I don't deserve to have you, but instead of saying that I had abandoned you, it's you who has abandoned me. At that time, I had lost completely, and I didn't deserve to have you." The waves on the river surface grew larger and larger, and ripples started swirling. A huge whirlpool formed in the middle of the river, and the strange voice came out from within, bringing along with it a terrifying air of awe. "Shichumi tua, ihisu pasuo? Don't deserve to have me? So why have you come?" "I've found my Tao heart." Blind's eyebrows and hair fluttered in the wind, and his clothes flew outwards. His voice, like the rumbling thunder, resonated through the clouds. His will to fight became incomparably sharp and powerful, as though a god had once again returned to the mortal world. The me in the past only chased after the extremes of the divine eyes. I could see through everything, yet I couldn't see through the human heart, whereas the me now has someone I need to protect. For this child, I found my fighting spirit once again, and picked my confidence and Tao heart. He stretched out a hand toward the river's surface, and his voice rumbled. "My long tua, I had abandoned you in the past, but will you still be willing to follow me? Do you still reminiscence about the times in the past, the days we bathed in blood? If you want, if you are willing, I shall do as you wish. I shall let you experience fights, and the bitterness that you had never experienced. One man, one spear. We shall kill all gods and devils that stand in our way." Boom! The river's surface exploded, and the roars of a dragon rang in all directions. From the bottom of the river, a huge pitch-black dragon rose, formed by black bones. It slowly swam out from the water, and its numerous joints cracked continuously as it coiled around Blind's small and thin frame. The pitch-black bones trembled and rattled nonstop. The sound became louder and louder while rays of blood light shone through. An incomparably terrifying aura spread out along with an unrivaled fierceness. Blind gripped tightly one of the bones, and the black dragon suddenly retracted itself. The bones collided with each one as sparks shot out in all directions, and changed shape into a black dragon spear. "Long tua, you are finally awake. I'm also finally awake." With the black dragon's spear in his hand, Blind was full of delight. He didn't even turn his head back when he left disabled elderly village. "I will never return to this village again. Follow me to relive the days we bathed in blood." In Secret Waters Pass, Qin Mu sensed a terrifying aura bursting forth in great ruins, and he raised his head to look in that direction for a moment before looking away. There were all kinds of strange things in great ruins that would erupt from time to time, so it was actually something very normal. "I plan to make a trip to Sunwell. Are you girls really coming along as well?" Qin Mu surveyed his surroundings, and his gaze landed on Ling Yuxiu, Si Yunxiang, and Hu Linger. "I'm going over there to fulfill my promise, but I don't know if Sunwell will welcome you girls or not." He revealed an apologetic look as he added, "You girls are different from us, outsiders, while we are the abandoned people of great ruins." Hu Linger transformed into a little fox and jumped onto Qin Mu's shoulder. She chased the dark green flood dragon off him and wrapped herself around his neck like a scarf. "I'm also an abandoned person of great ruins, so I shall go with young master. If you marry a chicken, follow the chicken. If you marry a dog, follow the dog. Since I'm already the cult mistress, I definitely have to follow cult master wherever you go," Si Yunxiang said shyly. Ling Yuxiu sneered and said, "Even the cult mistresses should have a first and second, right?" Si Yunxiang chuckled and said, What does the previous cult mistress want to say? Ling Yuxiu was furious, but then burst out laughing. I won't fight with you over this. I will just not go then. Grandpa Blind kidnapped me, so my father must be worried sick. I shall return to inform him that I'm safe and sound. The marriage was merely Grandpa Blind's game, so it's not counted. If Saint Xiang really treats it as a real marriage, then she can be the cult mistress. That's right, cowherd boy. What promise are you going to fulfill? I made a promise to the Sun Guardian that I will help reignite the sun on Sunship. Qin Mu caressed the head of the little fox on his neck. After finding Sun Jade Eyes, I've been busy and couldn't leave for a visit. The longer I drag this out, the shorter the Sun Guardian's life will be. Since I've already come to Secret Waters Pass, I might as well make a trip to Sunwell and hopefully manage to help. Secret Waters Pass was very close to Constellation Sea, and he could head to Sunwell from there. Qin Mu really wanted to meet the Sun Guardian again, afraid that her legs might have already been swallowed by the ship. Ling Yuxiu and Xianxia had never heard of Constellation Sea or Sunwell, but Ling Yuxiu had seen Sunship before. She acted nonchalantly and asked, "When Sunship came to Border Dragon City, I missed it and didn't meet this Sun Guardian." "That's right. I still don't know if that person is a man or a woman." "A girl. Her name is Yan Jingjing," Qin Mu said honestly. "Her age is similar to yours." Ling Yuxiu gave a warm smile and said, "Since our ages are similar, we can surely get along well. Let me go to broaden my horizons and meet this sister Yan." Xianxia rolled her eyes and smiled. "I got caught by Grandpa Blind carelessly and was forced to marry. Yet Cult Master doesn't have tender, protective feelings for the fairer sex. Since I'm already here, it's also good to go and meet the Sun Guardian to broaden my horizons." Qin Mu nodded and said, "The position of Sun Guardian is extremely high. She is of the god race and her status is slightly higher than of me, an abandoned person of great ruins." God race. The two girls were speechless. Qin Mu summoned a flood dragon and it immediately changed into its true body. Everyone went onto its back. But when the dragon Qilin wanted to jump on as well, he was kicked down by Qin Mu. With a pleasant face, he said warmly, "Fatty dragon, you should train your body more. Linger, supervise him." Hu Linger gave a sound of acknowledgement. The dragon Qilin blinked and couldn't help shuddering when he saw Qin Mu's vibrant smile. He cried out, "Cult Master, I won't dare to be picky anymore." "Not picky anymore?" Qin Mu said with a pleasant face. "So why are there still fire element divine vitality pills hidden in your cheeks? Not eaten?" The dragon Qilin jumped in shock and cried out, "How did you know I hid my fire element divine vitality pills in the cheeks?" Qin Mu took out a mirror and said with a pained heart, "Look at yourself. Of all the places to hide, you chose your cheeks, and you hid such a large amount as well." The dragon Qilin immediately looked at the mirror and saw his two cheeks bulging out as though there were two huge balls in his mouth. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 389. True Dragon into the Nest. Appearance of the Divine Technique. The dragon Qilin wanted to spit out the fire element divine vitality pills, but when he saw the pleasant smile on Qin Mu's face, he got so frightened that he gulped down all of the pills. "What a pity, he should be able to go on the table for New Year," muttered Qin Mu. The dragon Qilin shuddered and ran behind them obediently. Hu Linger in the meantime stood on his head and encouraged him continuously, "Fatty dragon, if you run slow, you will be slaughtered." Qin Mu relaxed. Secret Waters Pass wasn't far from Border Dragon City, and according to the geographical map of Great Ruins, Constellation Sea was located at Heavenly Dragon Star Palace that was north of Border Dragon City. It was 200 miles away, and it was called Star Sea on the map. However, the people around Border Dragon City called it Constellation Sea. There were numerous locations in Great Ruins that had a different name from the past, which had to have been a result from the fall of Founding Emperor era. According to the information Qin Mu knew, after Founding Emperor era ended, there was a huge break in the recorded history. There were about 1,000 or more years during which few things were put to writing. Other than some of the scattered records lying in 3 big sacred grounds and Little Jade Capital, other sects and countries didn't have any memory of that period of time. Qin Mu summoned the dark green flood dragon, and it opened its mouth to reveal the true dragon's nest that had been refined by dragon-rearing sovereign. The 5 feet true dragon's nest was still quite big, but even a god like dragon-rearing sovereign could only refine it to the size of a table. If he wanted to make it smaller, he would require even more strength. With dragon-rearing sovereign's current cultivation, it was impossible for him. Yet the true dragon lord was refined into a jade pendant. So doesn't this mean that the cultivation of the person who refined the emperor's disc is even higher than that of dragon-rearing sovereign? Qin Mu was stunned. Who was the one who had taken away the true dragon lord and refined it into a jade pendant? Why did that god hand it to Ling family? What was their aim? The dark green flood dragon spat out the true dragon's nest. But just as Qin Mu planned to catch it, he immediately felt an incomparably heavy pressure. Take it back quickly. Boom. The two girls were alarmed when they saw Cult Master Qin being squashed by the dragon's nest. Both his shoulders dislocated. This fake mountain basin seems to be much heavier than Great Cult Master's sword pellet. Xianxia whispered and stuck her tongue out when she recalled how she had sent black gold essence for Qin Mu's sword, causing him to sink into the ground. Qin Mu grunted. He exerted all his strength to pull out his 10 fingers. The dragon Qilin immediately ran over and tried to curry favor by saying, "Cult Master, I can help you lick your hands." No need. Qin Mu's arms swayed helplessly, and he circulated his vital qi. He endured the pain as he set his arms back into place and took out a bottle of dragon saliva to spread it on his fingers. He then let out a sigh of relief. With the appearance of the true dragon's nest, the emperor's disc on his neck had begun to stir once more. It became hot and scorching, and stretched its body like a small dragon squirming once more, trying to fly back into the dragon's nest. Such a situation had happened once before, when Qin Mu was nearly killed by the flood dragons. At that time, the emperor's disc had popped out its small head to make the bunch of flood dragons submit. However, the true dragon lord had already been refined into the emperor's disc. Dragon-rearing sovereign had said that it was impossible for it to become a true dragon. True dragons were born from qi and fate, which gave rise to their corporeal bodies. True dragon lord had been a main dragon vein, but it was refined into treasure, so there was no more possibility for it to become a true dragon. Qin Mu took the emperor's disc from his neck. The moment he loosened his grip, it flew up and stretched out in the air. It gradually grew larger, but its length was still about a foot or so. It then vanished into the true dragon's nest. Qin Mu looked at the dragon's nest and saw that the emperor's disc coiled around the center of the 9th layer, precisely in the gap there. When the true dragon lord entered the nest, a world-shaking aura burst forth. The flood dragons beside Qin Mu turned limp as they fell prone on the ground. Even the flood dragon that was carrying everyone hurriedly went down to lie prone on the ground, unmoving. The dragon Qilin also immediately stopped. The fur and scales on his body stood up on end, but he couldn't fight against the terrifying aura from the dragon's nest. He was pressured down on the ground, not daring to even lift his head. Qin Mu didn't care much about it, for he saw numerous runes flickering on the dragon's nest. They were the writings of the dragon race. There were thousands of them that continuously changed, without a single one repeating. Different words contained different meaning, and the writings on the true dragon's nest contained an incomparably complicated technique. True dragons were born from fate, and it was born from the Tao of heaven and earth. Thus true dragons were close to Tao, and every dragon would naturally master the language of the dragon race. There was no need for them to learn it. In that case, there was no need to repeat any word, since the dragons could use a word to represent a phrase, a sentence, and even an essay of thousands of words. It was because of this that there was an unimaginably high wall blocking them when other races tried to learn the dragon language. Dragon-rearing sovereign's bloodline was extremely pure, but he was a flood dragon and not a true dragon. Because of that, even if he had taught Qin Mu quite a lot of the dragon language, there were still numerous words on the dragon's nest that he didn't recognize. Among the words dragon-rearing sovereign had taught him, the meaning of some of them was extremely complicated. If someone wanted to express them in human words, tens of thousands of them would be needed. What was even worse was that some couldn't even be expressed in human language. Qin Mu memorized diligently, putting to memory all of the dragon language on the true dragon's nest. The two girls came over, and xianxia asked in bewilderment, "What are these writings?" "Writings of the dragon race." Ling Yuxiu was astonished. "These are all writings of the dragon race. I had learned some before. My father had taught me, but I only recognize a few of them, a couple of them here and there." Qin Mu gave it some thought and suddenly asked, "Sister Yuxiu, do you have the original 9 Dragons Monarch technique of your Ling family?" At first, it hadn't been outstanding, but after the improvements of the experts of the many generations, it had slowly become a top-notch technique. However, Qin Mu reckoned the first copy would have still been preserved. Otherwise, Emperor Yanfeng wouldn't have taught Ling Yuxiu the dragon language. Qin Mu suspected that the original 9 Dragons Monarch technique was written in the dragon language, and Emperor Yanfeng had taught his daughter to let her read the most primitive version of 9 Dragons Monarch technique. "How did you know I've seen it?" Ling Yuxiu was truly astonished. "The most ancient 9 Dragons Monarch technique of my Ling family is written in the dragon language, and I've indeed seen it before. Father had made me memorize it before teaching me his version." Qin Mu smiled and said, "If you'll recite the most ancient version of 9 Dragons Monarch technique in the dragon language once, I will give you a huge benefit later." Ling Yuxiu shook her head. "I can't recite it, but I can write it down." Qin Mu fetched some paper and brush, and Ling Yuxiu wrote down a few strangely shaped characters. "This is it. 9 Dragons Monarch technique of my Ling family was recorded on the Emperor's disc, but it's a pity it has gone missing. I wonder which vile thief stole it." Qin Mu's face grew slightly red, but he didn't reply to her. Instead, he continued to look at what she had written. "I see, 9 Dragons Monarch technique is actually the introductory chapter of the technique that appeared on the True Dragon Lord and the True Dragon's Nest." He looked through the paper before looking at runes that were flashing continuously on the dragon's nest and finally found the overall basis for the True Dragon Lord's technique. After that, Qin Mu continued to study it, and a broad and exquisite technique slowly formed in his mind, becoming rich and perfect. Ling family's 9 Dragon Monarch technique was only the introduction and not any divine or miraculous technique. However, since the Ling family could perfect it into a top-notch technique that could compete with the techniques of the 3 big scared grounds, it was enough to see how astounding it truly was. He cracked the riddle bit by bit, and he became more and more astonished. It was the technique to seize fate that dragon-rearing sovereign had mentioned, but it wasn't completely about it. By cultivating the technique to absorb the dragon chi of the True Dragon Lord, he would become the True Dragon Lord himself. The strong points of that technique lay in making the magic power of the cultivator incomparably dense, and his strength like that of a true dragon. Even among all the techniques that Qin Mu had seen in the past, it was probably only Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that could reach a cultivation on the same level. However, the attainments of that technique in strength and the corporeal body was not something Overlord Body 3 elixir technique could compare. Even though Qin Mu had more than small attainments in his corporeal body, Overlord Body 3 elixir technique required a powerful body refinement technique to complement it, but he didn't have that kind of skill. The body refinement technique in great educational heavenly devil scriptures wasn't considered to be top-notch. However, the technique on the True Dragon's Nest could refine the corporeal body into that of a Dragon King. Superb technique. Truly a superb technique. Emperor Yanfeng is remarkable as well. Qin Mu was full of praises after he had cracked more than half of the technique. He only raised his head after meeting numerous writings that he didn't recognize. He let out a shaky breath and praised, "His Majesty is truly remarkable, cultivating an introduction into an exceptional martial art. Such a talent isn't much inferior to that of Imperial Preceptor." "Sister Yuxiu, when had your Ling family received this technique?" "I guess about 700 or more years ago." Ling Yuxiu recalled what Emperor Yanfeng had told her. Father once mentioned that the ancestor of Ling family had met a god who passed him the Emperor's disc and even taught him the dragon language. However, the character of our ancestor was lax, and he didn't put learning the dragon language to heart. At that time, he liked a woman and placed all his mind on her, who was none other than our first grandmother. Yet when our ancestor wanted to learn, he realized that the god had already left and that he'd already forgotten 80 to 90% of the dragon language the god had taught him. In the end, he could only comprehend the initial 9 dragons monarch technique from the emperor's disc. Grandpa Def's words were true, Qin Mu thought to himself. No wonder that Grandpa Blind also said that women are trouble. It's really the case. Grandpa Butcher also said that women are too troublesome. Old Ma doesn't like to be close to women either, and now I see that there are actually reasons for that. I can't be like the ancestor of Ling family and delay my cultivation. However, Sister Yuxiu is really quite pretty, and even though Sister Xiang is skinnier, she's also quite good-looking. His heart was alarmed, and he immediately wiped out the impure thoughts in his mind. He pulled the true dragon lord out from the true dragon's nest, and the dragon-shaped dragon vein turned back into a jade pendant with its head connected to the tail. Ling Yuxiu saw this and was slightly suspicious. This piece of jade is slightly similar to the Emperor's disc of our Ling family, but there's also some difference. I've heard the Emperor's disc was a jade pendant while this piece consists of parts put together. There's a gap between them. Qin Mu smiled and said, I said I will give you a huge benefit earlier, so now I shall teach you the 9 dragons monarch technique I comprehended. Ling Yuxiu burst out laughing. My father taught me 9 dragons monarch technique, so could you have comprehended more than him? Qin Mu slowly explained the 9 dragons monarch technique that he had comprehended, and gradually, Ling Yuxiu's face became more and more solemn. She realized that at the start it was still the initial technique of the Ling family, but as it went further it became more and more profound. It was even more profound and powerful than the 9 dragons monarch technique that Emperor Yanfeng had perfected. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 390. Suspense in Star Sea. Could it be that I learned the fake 9 dragons monarch technique and the cowherd boy learned the true one? Ling Yuxiu was in a slight daze. Only the introductory chapter of the 9 dragons monarch technique that Qin Mu had taught her belonged to the Ling family. The content afterward had surpassed what she had ever known. Not only did it surpass, it even transcended it. What was most terrifying was that 9 dragons monarch technique of Ling family seemed like a branch developed from the introductory form, while the 9 dragons monarch technique that Qin Mu taught her was the trunk. Her branch was only one possibility from it. The most primitive 9 dragons monarch technique was like a small sapling that had just broken out from the dirt. Ling family's perfected 9 dragons monarch technique was like the trunk breaking off and growing a branch, while Qin Mu's 9 dragons monarch technique grew upward like a tree. 9 dragons monarch technique was perfected by generations and generations of people, until it was finally finished at Emperor Yanfeng's generation. By then, the technique had already grown to its extreme and there was no more possibility of digging out more potential. However, Qin Mu's 9 dragons monarch technique possessed boundless potential. Yet why did the continuous hard work of the many generations of Ling family unable to compare to Qin Mu's comprehension of a short while? Could he be a saint that appears once every 500 years as well? Qin Mu didn't think much about it. The 9 dragons monarch technique he had learned from the true dragon's nest wasn't complete either. He just taught Ling Yuxiu what he had comprehended, which was sort of a compensation for the Ling family. It was impossible for him to return the Emperor's disc. It was a treasure that Cripple had given him, and the rules of Great Ruins were that the things given to one could never be returned. Besides, the true dragon's nest and Emperor's disc were a pair, so one couldn't be without the other. With the nest, Ling family had no use for the Emperor's disc. The complete 9 dragons monarch technique could only be seen when the two were combined. Qin Mu took the Emperor's disc away from the dragon's nest, and the pressure on the flood dragons and the dragon Qilin instantly vanished. They all rose with eyes full of respect as they looked at Qin Mu. He ordered them to continue on their way to Heavenly Dragon Star Palace. When he looked at the dragon's nest, his heart stirred slightly. He smiled and said, I have an extremely fine place to cultivate 9 dragons monarch technique. Sister Yuxiu, come with me. Let us jump into this dragon's nest. After he finished saying that, he grabbed Ling Yuxiu's hand and jumped into the dragon's nest. Ling Yuxiu was astonished, thinking about how they were supposed to jump in when the fake mountain basin was so small. Yet when they came close to it, it grew larger and larger. Their figures descended at a quick speed, as though they were dropping several thousand yards from the sky. Meanwhile, the landscape in the basin seemed to have become a huge space that was over 20 miles in length and width. Just the perimeter of the 9th level of the dragon's nest was already over 10 miles. Just as the two landed, cries of astonishment came from the sky. Xianxia had actually jumped with them as well, and when she landed in the space of the true dragon's nest, she realized that there was a completely different world there. It astonished her. Linger saw the three of them disappear from the dragon's back. She immediately jumped over. When she looked into the landscape of the basin, she saw Qin Mu and the other two like ants. They seemed to have become part of the landscape in the basin. However, they were still moving and talking, though their voices seemed to be coming from dozens of miles away. They sounded unclear. The three of them looked curiously around the place. Even though Qin Mu had followed dragon rearing sovereign into the dragon's nest before, most of it had been submerged in magma, so he couldn't see it back then. Only now could he take a look at the whole nest. The inside was split into 9 levels, and each one had numerous glowing pillars. Some were stalactites, some were dragon teeth, and some were pillars. The writings and pictures flashing on the ground and the structures transformed continuously, containing indescribable mysterious principles. Ling Yuxiu took in a breath and instantly felt the incomparably dense dragon qi flooding toward her. She couldn't help giving out a cry of astonishment at that. The dragon qi in the true dragon's nest was even denser than in the capital. On top of that, comparing the dragon qi here to the qi of the 9 dragons was like comparing heaven to earth. Their quality was completely different. The dragon qi in the nest seemed to be of much higher quality, far surpassing that of the 9 dragons. After all, that qi had formed when the 9 dragons' veins converged, while the dragon qi in the nest had gathered all the dragon qi of the veins in all of Eternal Peace Empire and Great Ruins. Cultivating here is much faster than cultivating in the capital. Ling Yuxiu executed the 9 dragon monarch technique that Qin Mu had imparted to her and instantly felt her cultivation increasing by leaps and bounds. Her vital qi also became much purer. Great educational heavenly devil scriptures had techniques that observed the divine dragons, so Xianxia gave it a try as well. She felt the dragon qi flooding toward her endlessly, and after a short moment, it was as if she had cultivated the technique for dozens of days. It shocked her to no end. If she could cultivate here for over a dozen days, it would be equivalent to cultivating diligently in the outside world for dozens of years. If there wasn't any restriction in cultivation realms, her attainments in techniques and divine arts would be unimaginable. Of course, even if there was a restriction due to cultivation realm, it was still extraordinary. The nest was definitely a sacred ground to cultivate dragon attribute techniques and divine arts. It's a pity it doesn't benefit me much. Xianxia shook her head. She mainly cultivated the creation writings from great educational heavenly devil scriptures, having been taught by the young patriarch. He had studied the 7 writings of creation to their extreme and imparted all of his comprehensions to her. However, even if she didn't receive the teachings of unity technique which Qin Mu got, she was still considered one of the rare experts in the younger generation. Qin Mu was also absorbing the qi of the true dragon, but it was different for him. Ling Yuxiu cultivated 9 dragons monarch technique, while he was trying to incorporate the body refinement part of 9 dragons monarch technique into his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique. The powerful point of 9 dragons monarch technique lay in the vigorous magic power that was no inferior to that of Overlord Body 3 elixir technique. However, the latter lacked precisely a technique for body refinement, so Qin Mu wanted to patch that weakness. He had incorporated the 9 dragons monarch technique that Emperor Yanfeng had taught him into Overlord Body 3 elixir technique before, but new one he had comprehended was much more complicated. The language of the dragon race was also different from the human language, so it was much harder to fuse the two techniques. Even trying to absorb only the body refinement technique was very difficult, not something that could be done in a short while. Not long later, Linger's voice came from the outside. "Young master, we are at Heavenly Dragon Star Palace." Qin Mu left Ling Yuxiu, who was in deep cultivation, inside the dragon's nest while bringing Xianxia out. When the two of them flew out, Their bodies gradually became bigger. By the time they landed on the ground, their bodies had returned to normal. There was no discomfort in the whole process. Dragon-rearing sovereign is remarkable. He didn't shrink the dragon's nest, but instead shrunk the space in which it exists. Qin Mu exclaimed in admiration. That kind of ability was equivalent to a Taotai sack, but a Taotai sack contained space inside, while dragon-rearing sovereign used great magic power to shrink the space of dozens of miles into just 7-8 feet. Heavenly Dragon Star Palace is right in front, Hu Linger said. Qin Mu looked forward and saw dilapidated palaces before his eyes. Heavenly Dragon Star Palace was a cluster of old constructions. Numerous villages were clustered within them, while above were huge mountain-like rocks floating in the sky. They were black, red, blue, and all the other colors. Those rocks were filled with thousands of holes, and they collided time and again, showering stone fragments. Many larger pieces also fell down, but they never landed on the villages. Instead, they'd fall somewhere outside. The once tall and majestic divine palaces and shrines had become ruins, yet they could still protect the people living within them. Qin Mu looked at the earthy-looking villagers wearing beast skin clothes and couldn't help feeling a sense of familiarity. Xianxia's face was slightly reddish. Even during winter, the villagers wore short pants and close-fitting shirts made of beast skins. There were also some kids that were over 10 years old still squatting down with half of their buttocks showing shamefully. I was also like this back then, Great Cult Master Qin said excitedly. Xianxia tried to imagine Great Cult Master Qin also showing half of his buttocks back then and couldn't help spitting at the image. Qin Mu walked forward and greeted the elders in the village. He asked them about the direction to Constellation C, and after a moment, Qin Mu returned back, saying excitedly, "The elder said that Constellation C is very dangerous and it's always shooting stars. It's a resplendent sight at night. Let's go over there quickly." Xianxiang cursed him endlessly in her heart. They brought the bunch of dragons to a huge valley below which was a deep abyss. However, there were countless spots of white light shining in the darkness. Looking down from above, it indeed looked like they were looking at a starry sky. "How pretty," Hu Linger said excitedly. "They are truly like the night sky. Even the Milky Way is there." Xianxiang's scalp started to crawl. The Milky Way in the abyss of Star Sea was indeed similar to the Milky Way in the sky, but the stars were colliding continuously as though they were within a bowl of boiling porridge that seemed incomparably dangerous. Whoosh! A weird pitch-black wind came blowing over from the abyss, and a star was blown out. It was as huge as a mountain, but it didn't land on the ground. Instead, it came to float in the sky. Suddenly, another star flew out of the abyss, and the two huge rocks collided, exploding with a dull blast. Power burst forth, making Xianxiang's heart palpitate. "Cult Master, this Star Sea is not a place where people of our cultivation can step into. Even existences of the Cult Master level might not come back. Don't worry, we have the Flood Dragons to assist us." But even though he said that, he still felt some reservations against entering. Sunwell is quite a distance away from here, and it's located at the center of great ruins. However, Yan Jingjing said they had come from Star Sea and returned to Sunwell through it. Could Star Sea have some passage to reach Sunwell quickly? He pondered it for a moment, then blew his golden flute to have the flood dragons fly toward the Star Sea. Xianxiang was on guard as though she was facing a dangerous enemy, but then she suddenly relaxed. She shook her head. "If the stars come, there's no use even if we try to defend. Why don't I see if Cult Master has any thoughts about this?" Qin Mu carefully executed secrets of dragon control to avoid the stars as he closed in on the galaxy in Star Sea. They were clearly going underground, but it didn't look like that. The place seemed like another world. They seemed to have entered a vast and deep space. Around them were stars that were the size of mountains. Qin Mu looked back and could only see a huge crack from where they had come. He couldn't see the surface anymore. The bright stars gave off rays of all colors while the galaxy swirled. Millions and millions of so-called stars were moving along and colliding continuously, causing waves and waves of force to bombard the group like knives. "Divine Dragon Cover!" Qin Mu shouted, and the flood dragons changed their formation, their tails connecting together. Their hind claws interlocked and with heads downwards, they created a ball to protect them, keeping them away from any danger. Qin Mu looked toward the center of the Milky Way and saw that there were yin-yang fish that looked like the Taiji diagram. They were like two incomparably huge and deep wells, while the countless stars swirled continuously around them. Above the deep wells, there seemed to be two tiers. It had to be great ruins where Sun Well and Moon Well were located. Qin Mu's heart trembled violently. The star sea didn't look like it was made. Instead, it seemed like another world, a world that was countless times smaller,